Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29. Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound.
I declare the meeting officially open, and just to see, I think there's a few members of the public outside. While we're waiting for members of the public and Statutory Committee members, we'll just take apologies if that's okay. We have an apology from the Chair, Deborah Erskine, who is not well, and from Cathal Boylan, who's currently away, and we send our best wishes to the Chair. Hopefully she is feeling better soon. I know she's been struggling with her voice for quite some time. She's battled on regardless, and no doubt she's tuned in today to the meeting. And welcome to everybody in the public gallery. You're very welcome here today, and just to inform you that you can use your mobile devices through Wi-Fi, but all mobile devices should be muted. Passwords are available, and there should be no recordings and no photographs taken today. So you're very welcome, especially to the two folks from my ex-old school, Carrickfergus Grammar School, here on work placement today. Guys, good to see you at the back there. And to everybody else as well, you're equally welcome as well. So just proceed through the agenda. We've covered apologies. We now have declarations of interest. I need to remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to matters under discussion today. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises. Do any members have any declarations of interest today, Keith?
Just a small one. I'm a resident of Ulster Council, and there's an issue coming up. Yeah, correspondence.
Any other member today? Nope, thank you. Okay, on to Chairperson's business. Members, at page 6 there's a memo from the Head of Communications in respecting to joining committee members by Zoom. Just to inform you that you should not share personalised links to committee meetings in order to prevent unauthorised access. Personalised links can only be accessed by one individual, and which as a result could mean that the member is unable to join the meeting if the link has been shared previously. Members are also reminded that the sound and microphones on members' tablets should be muted during meetings. Also at page 7 there's a memo from the head of the IS office on the provision of the rollout of new devices, and just to inform members that they are asked to note an extended deadline of the 14th of June for completion of the constituency office survey, which is required to ensure the delivery of these devices is not delayed. The link to the survey was emailed separately to members on the 7th of June. And just one item for myself, members, you'll be aware, I'm going to do it now in the Chairperson's business rather than AOB. There has been overnight the BBC story in regards to the disparity between TransLink fares travelling from Belfast to Dublin and the cost of fares back from Dublin to Belfast. At some stages it's over 60% of a difference. I know as a committee, through our scrutiny of the department, we're very keen to see a promotion of use of public transport and also value for money in terms of fares. So I just want to seek the support of the committee to write the TransLink, just to try and get a steer on why that's the case and what plans maybe going forward can be looked at, especially as there are now plans in the back of the hub opening to see a 1 hour or a daily 1 hour service going back and forth. TransLink have in a statement to BBC said that there's a 20% subsidy to travellers travelling from Dublin that isn't in place for travellers travelling from Belfast, but that still doesn't seem to square the circle in terms of the disparity between the fees and the costs. So just seeking members' support to write the TransLink to get clarity in that, and happy to take any comments on that at this stage.
Happy to.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, item 4 is the draft minutes. The draft meeting minutes of last week's proceedings, the 5th of June, have been tabled in your pack. I just want to seek agreement that members are content that the minutes are a true and accurate record of the meeting that took place. Can I get a agreement?
Yep.
Yep, thank you. No problem, and I'll sign those at the end of the meeting, members. Are there any matters arising from last week's meeting that hasn't been covered in the agenda? Nope. Okay, on to item 6 then, which is correspondence. At page 19, there's a correspondence memo. Item 6.2 at page 21, there's written evidence from the Electrical Vehicle Association Northern Ireland. And I just want to advise members that, as requested, the EVANI have provided an update on the current landscape in Northern Ireland, and we're very grateful to them for that. And can I seek members' views and agreement to forward the evidence to the Department for comment on the issues and recommendations raised? Thank you. 6.4. Page 31, correspondence from the Minister for Infrastructure regarding the public consultation on regional strategic planning policy for renewable and low carbon energy. And just to inform you all members that in the agreed timescales for interaction between Assembly committees and departments, it states that the department should consult with committees about any proposed review of existing policies and the development of any new policies. It also states that sufficient time should be built into the timescales of the consultations to ensure committees to be fully engaged in the process. This is to ensure that the committees can exercise their advisory and scrutiny role by reflecting their views in advance of any final policy decision by the Minister. Any decision subsequent to this should be informed to the committee. And in his letter, the Minister states that a copy of the report will be provided once he has received a full update from officials. So again, members, just want to seek agreement to write to the Minister to outline the expectation that the committee will consider any options proposed in any summary report to ensure the committee is afforded the opportunity to express any views it may have in advance of any final policy decision taken by the Minister. Are you content with that course of action? Excellent. Item 6.8 and 6.11. At page 57, there's correspondence from the Mid-Ulster District Council regarding the A29 Cookstown bypass. And at page 65, there's correspondence from the Minister for Infrastructure providing further information requested during the oral evidence on city deals on the 22nd. Keith, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to come in on that, Chair, that 6.8 one. I was reading the correspondence from Ulster Council, and there seemed to be clarifying points as of the meeting that was here on the 22nd of May with DFI officials. So at the back of that communication, they've requested that they'd be happy to come in and discuss that, and I would request that, or propose that they could come in and talk about the Cookstown and the whole Mid-South West deal, which I'll cover in the skilling as well. So whether that's Council or Mid-South West partnership, to give us an understanding of that, to clarify the points that what DFI said based on what they're saying. So I would propose we get them in for a brief conversation.
Okay. You've heard proposed members that we bring in representatives from Mid-Ulster District Council in respect to the item. Is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Yeah, I'll be happy to proceed. Yep, thank you. And as I say, we've covered item on regarding the city deal. Mid-Ulster Council has set out a number of points of clarification in relation to this. I want to seek agreements to request clarification on what is meant by the statement the lifespan of the deal will be 10 to 20 years. However, there is this is at the discretion of the executive on whether the department will be required to bid for funding for city deal infrastructure projects as part of the normal budget cycle, and if so, how city deals projects will be prioritised along with infrastructure capital projects. Now, I know members, we discussed this whenever we met with the department officials previously regarding city deal. Are you happy with that course of action, just to try and get that clarity? Yep, excellent. And seek members, they're content to note the remaining items within the correspondence.
Chair, just one,
yep, go ahead.
If I may. That's 6.9 on shop mobility. Shop Mobility had a conversation with me, and obviously their money is effectively staying the same, so they're under pressure, and the communication they said to me was all shop mobilities across NI are under pressure. And the argument they make, which is a valid one, we're supporting Translink, we're supporting community transport to get people into towns, but then we're not supporting people to get around towns. So the same money, okay, may seem okay, but it's not okay, because it's going to mean they're going to have to cut service and cut timings and cut opening hours. So appreciate, I'm agreeing with the suggested action, to be fair. So they have wrote to the Minister. He will go back to them.
Yes.
Which no doubt then we'll get a copy of that, and we'll see what he says based on that. But they're under pressure, and it will mean cuts to that,
no,
that
absolutely.
scheme.
I know it's the same in my area, so I'm sure it's the same in other members' area. And the point's well made about, there's no point being able to
get to an
area without actually being able to get round it if you have difficulty. So I think it really is important to seek that clarity in terms of their funding.
Thank you.
Okay, nothing else in correspondence, members. We'll move to item 7 and welcome Sustrans, who are going to give us some oral evidence today and also take questions from members. So you're very welcome if you want to take your places at the front here. And we welcome Claire Pollock, who's the head of Sustrans Northern Ireland, Beth Harding, who's active school travel manager for Sustrans, and Perla Mansour, who's Routes and Network senior project manager as well. So you're very welcome to the committee. Thanks very much for taking the time to come and see us today. On behalf of the usual chairperson, Deborah Erskine, she sends her apologies. She is unable to speak today. As members will know, she's been untoo well for a number of weeks now. She is tuned in, and she again just wants to record her apologies to you for not being able to be here. So the plan would be to give you 5 or 10 minutes to set out a few of your proposals in terms of giving us that presentation, and then we will ask some questions from around the table. Should be about 45 minutes or so. Would that be about right? Okay, so over to yourselves.
Thank you. And just to say, was there a presentation that we had sent through? Is that?
It's in members' packs. It's already been circulated,
members,
so we can see it. If you
okay,
don't, we can go
it.
through it anyway.
Okay, great.
And I'm sure members have all been through it as well prior to the meeting.
Thank you.
If you want to talk, you plan to talk through the presentation?
Yes, I was, but
we can see it here on the laptops.
You can see it.
Anyway.
So that's great. Okay, super. Thank you. Well, look, thank you very much for inviting us along today. I'm Claire Pollock, head of Sustrans Northern Ireland, joined by Perla Mansour, our senior Routes and Networks project manager, and Beth Harding, our active school travel manager. We're here today to let you know about Sustrans as an organisation, what it is we do, what our aims and objectives are, how we're delivering some of the pieces that we do in Northern Ireland to achieve our mission and objectives, and the opportunities and challenges we see going forward in terms of enabling active travel. So Sustrans is a UK-wide organisation. It's been in existence for almost 50 years. Our vision is a society where the way that we travel creates healthier places and happier lives for everyone. And quite simply, we do that by focusing on making it easier for people to walk and cycle. And we want people and communities to enjoy the benefits that being active brings. We've 2 strategic priorities: Paths for Everyone, which is around a focus of safe traffic-free routes, so greenways, routes that an unaccompanied 12-year-old can navigate themselves. And Livable Cities and Towns is our other focus, which is around supporting people to travel for everyday journeys by walking and cycling. Essentially, we want to see a shift in focus from moving cars to moving people. And the work we do does support a range of government agendas. We work in partnership with a wide range of organisations and statutory bodies to tackle the challenges of air pollution, health inequalities, physical and mental well-being issues, and simply by achieving our mission of making it easier for people to walk and cycle, we can make a really good impact on those agendas which are cross-cutting in government. We have a slide there in the pack that shows you a range of kind of crises facing society at the moment. These are wide-ranging, and another benefit that's maybe not explicitly on that slide is reducing congestion. And we know that congestion costs our society millions economically. And in Belfast, we know that over 9,000 return cycling trips are made every day, daily, by people who could have travelled by car. And if you were to line all those journeys up, it would be 27 miles worth of a traffic jam, basically Belfast to Ballymena. So we would be saving tons of carbon if we were to switch car journeys to active ones. So our work in Northern Ireland, we have a portfolio of work that covers behaviour change work and infrastructure. We have a number of projects where we're supporting people and enabling them to travel actively, and we do this through a number of settings: our schools programme, our workplaces programme, and in communities through active travel hubs. We have an infrastructure team who are working to push for safe and sustainable active travel infrastructure. We know that infrastructure is really important in terms of enabling people to travel independently. The Active School Travel Programme I'm going to come on to in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation, but it is our largest behaviour change programme. It's working across Northern Ireland with 500 schools. It's funded by both the Department for Infrastructure and the Public Health Agency. And we've had 10 years of successfully delivering that programme. The core aim is to increase the number of children walking, cycling or scooting for the journey to school. We've our Workplaces programme, which is leading the way. It's funded by the Public Health Agency, and the focus of that programme is to increase levels of physical activity by getting those folk travelling to work doing it actively. We work in a number of public sector organisations, both in Belfast and up in the northwest. And we see impact. We capture the stories of how people have changed, how they travel for their journey to work. And we've included there a case study, Shay Stinson. And as part of the package of measures that we're trying to encourage people to embrace in terms of shifting how they travel, we talk about public transport as well. So we appreciate people aren't going to necessarily step out of the car one day onto the bike the next day. It's a journey of change and multimodal, looking at public transport as well as walking and cycling and mixing modes is really important as part of that. Shay's a really good case study in terms of the benefits personally that he was seeing when he switched from driving to taking the bus. He was saving money on car parking and fuel costs, and we all get the benefits of reduced congestion and improved air quality by him making that change. So how do you get people to swap travelling by car for an active journey? And really the best way to do that is a combination of measures, and the Department for Transport commissioned a report which sets out that the best way to increase walking and cycling levels is by rolling out a programme of combined measures. So that's combining behaviour change, so supporting people with information, knowledge and skills with really good, safe, active travel infrastructure. And that combination and mixed package of measures has the most impact in terms of achieving change. The Active Travel Hub at C.S. Lewis Square is a really good example of how we've done this. It's situated within a community, so people are there, that it's part of their community, they're happy to be part of what's going on. It's at the intersection of two greenways. It's got really good public transport on the doorstep with the glider route, and it's got access to the Belfast bike share schemes. And then our team at the hub offer programmes of skills training, bike maintenance training, on-road cycle training to help people overcome the barriers. And it's a really good model for engagement. And we have an active travel hub up in the northwest as well, at the train station there. We were, until the autumn, running a community active travel programme. It was funded by Public Health Agency, but unfortunately closed due to funding cuts. And that programme was focused around working with 12 socially disadvantaged communities, supporting people to be more physically active by walking and cycling. And I think it's really important to understand that those communities are facing real day-to-day challenges, and improving their health and well-being through being active by walking and cycling is really important. But also, walking and cycling are affordable ways of getting about. So by working with those communities, we were opening up access to services, jobs, facilities in other parts of the city that those folk maybe hadn't the means or thought about travelling to. And I think there's a real gap there now that we're not offering that programme, sadly. So that's the behaviour change side of what we do. We have an infrastructure team, as I've mentioned, and importantly, we know that good infrastructure is a real enabler for achieving active travel. And we want to see a greenway network across Northern Ireland, a new national cycle network that is Northern Ireland wide. And it needs to be realistic and safe. It needs to be inclusive. And we need to see it as a project for Northern Ireland as a whole. The benefits of what greenways can bring are wide-ranging: economic benefits, regeneration, health and well-being, leisure opportunities, as well as safe and sustainable transport corridors. And we need to note that, from a user's perspective, a greenway goes from A to B. It gets people places. There's experiences along the way. And it may, the Cumber Greenway, for example, travels through 3 council areas, but a user doesn't need to see that. So we need to break down the barriers of, council boundaries, and we need to look at this as a whole piece. We also want to see urban cycling networks to enable everyday cycling. So within urban areas, people need to be able to get to where they want to go actively and sustainably. So we know the Eastern Transport Plan is looking at aligning modes of transport, and that's really important to enable more sustainable means of getting about. But we have the Belfast Bicycle Network Plan, for example, which has been developed for some time, and that needs to be implemented now. So that's what we are doing. It's some of our aims and objectives, and we are working in a very challenging context. We live in a car-dominated society, unfortunately. Over the years, we've planned and built places for the car, not for people. In Northern Ireland, there are 1 million cars and vans, according to the 2021 census. And the number of people travelling sustainably was just 27% there, reported in the recent travel survey. So we're on a downward trajectory in terms of how people are travelling, and that needs to be reversed. We want to see greater investment, and we know people want to see greater investment in active travel. The department works with ourselves to publish the Walking and Cycling Index, which is published every 2 years and sets out the state of walking, wheeling and cycling across 23 cities in the UK and Ireland. Belfast is one of those. And in that report published in March, 68% of people who responded to the survey said they support building safe, segregated on-road cycle tracks, even when that means removing road space. And the graph that's in the pack there shows that driving was actually the least popular form where people wanted to see investment. So we need to build the infrastructure to make it easy for people to leave the car at home. Budgets are obviously another challenge. They're a challenge across the piece, but people need to recognise that active travel is a preventative measure. I've talked about the range of agendas that it can work towards supporting, and we need to invest in active travel as a preventative measure in terms of meeting those agendas. There is the commitment in the Climate Change Act to spend 10% of the transport budget on active travel, and we really want to see this achieved. And up until recently, Northern Ireland had the lowest investment in active travel per head across the UK and the Republic of Ireland, at only £7 per head, compared to, for example, Scotland at £27 per head and the Republic of Ireland at £48 per head. So despite all these challenges, there are some really good things happening, and I want to spotlight in on the Active School Travel Programme as a really good example of what is making a difference, what is achieving an impact, and what is getting people to travel more actively. I mentioned it earlier, it's our biggest programme. I'll come on to some of the detail, but why is it good? So it's a regional programme, we're working right across Northern Ireland. It's achieving year-on-year impact. It's meeting a number of government agendas. It's funded jointly by the Department for Infrastructure and the Public Health Agency, so we're working towards the transport agenda and the health agenda. And the cost-benefit analysis for the programme is really strong. And importantly, there is so much more opportunity to deliver more. So since the programme began in 2013, we've seen really positive results. The 2022-23 results, which are in your pack there, show that in participating schools, the number of children travelling actively to school increased from 30% to 42%. And at the same time, the number of pupils being driven to school fell from 60% to 47%. Last year alone, we engaged with 60,000 pupils, parents and teachers at the schools that we're working with. And on the health piece as well, that we know that children in the programmes, in the schools that we're working with, the percentage of children achieving 60 minutes of physical activity each day increased from 29% to 46%. Half of primary school pupils live within a mile of a school, yet half of these pupils are driven to school. So there is huge opportunity to increase how children are travelling actively. The map in the pack there shows the spread of this programme. It's regional. We're working right across Northern Ireland, 500 plus schools, urban and rural, primary, post-primary. It's a competitive process to apply, so the schools have bought into it by making an application. We're oversubscribed every year. We can take on 60 schools currently each year, and they receive 3 years of support and then move to extended support thereafter. This year we carried out a new piece of research which identifies some of the impressive economic benefits of active travel through the programme. It's identified that over £500,000 was saved over the course of the year by families doing the school run actively instead of taking the car. So that was 1 million car trips saved and 1.5 million miles of car journeys saved and the associated carbon savings, etc. So this is really, really impressive. And furthermore, the health benefits and the road safety benefits weren't included in that study. So, the results are likely to be even stronger. And this programme is affordable. Currently we're delivering this programme at less than £400,000 of funding a year. So it's very good value for money and achieving impact. And what's more, we've highlighted in the pack how there's potential to expand this programme. I've talked about the need to mix behaviour change programmes with safe active travel infrastructure. And we want to engage with the schools that we've got and layer on a Safe Routes to Schools programme. Currently, this is a behaviour change only programme. If we were to have a Safe Routes to Schools programme, providing crossings, footpaths, there's so much more opportunity in terms of reach and who that we can support to travel actively. We'd like to see a school streets programme, which is where you restrict car traffic at the school gates. at drop-off and pick-up times. These projects happen right across the UK and in the Republic, and we're the only part of that area that doesn't have one of these programmes. We've a wealth of experience delivering those. And we believe really that every child in Northern Ireland who wants to should be able to travel safely, actively to school. We have a team of 8 people working on this programme. They are incredibly engaged and innovative and want to do more to support the audience they're working with. Yet we're sitting with the contract ending at the end of July. We don't want to lose this momentum. We want to see secure funding for this programme to continue and grow the impact that we're having. Over the last 4 years, we've had quite piecemeal funding, and it's the only programme working across Northern Ireland to tackle the school run. We appreciate, the pressures and complexities of government at the moment, but with the carbon reduction targets and the health inequalities and challenges, we need to invest in the health and well-being of our children for the future. So finally, just how do we make that transition to active travel and public transport? Well, really, walking, cycling and public transport need to be desirable for people to make the shift. So I've set out on that last slide how we think this can happen. We need to see investment in sustainable infrastructure, the greenways, the urban cycle routes. But we need to not forget about the behaviour change piece. So combining those two, build it and they will come doesn't necessarily work. We want to see the implementation of the 10% commitment to spend on active travel out of the transport budget, increase spending on public transport, reallocate road space, and really plan for future and sustainable places. So what future do we want? Do we want to see congested gridlock roads, or do we want to see more healthy and vibrant places where people are moving about and enjoying the space that they're within? And really, it's incredible the power of walking and cycling. So thank you very much for your time. We're happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Claire. Really appreciate it. I think all the members got a lot out of that, and just on behalf of the committee, I want to thank you and the organisation, everyone at Sustrans, for all that you're doing to encourage more people to get on their bike effectively, particularly on or in National Bike Week this week as well.
Yes,
and I think
indeed.
it's quite topical that you're here today talking to us about this important issue. So yeah, we'll take a couple of questions. I'll start off and then we'll go around the room and see where we get to. Just first of all, in terms of funding, I mean, you articulated very well, I think, the pressures that you're under and the disparity between the rest of the UK and Ireland in terms of the funding per head on active travel particularly. I'm just wanting to know, how you assess the impact of that and where we stand comparatively speaking despite that disparity in terms of how, the uptake of people who are cycling and being active, and also the impact. I mean, you talked about July being that sort of cliff edge in terms of funding, how important it would be strategically for you to have a multi-year budget to fund some of the strategic work that you're doing, because I think we all know that it's virtually impossible to plan anything strategically and structurally with a limited 1 year budget. So just a couple of those to begin with.
Yeah, so on the funding piece in terms of the per head spend, so we have been historically the lowest per head spend of active travel across the UK and Ireland. But we do know that every day walking and cycling takes 80,000 cars off the road in Belfast. We know that saves 13,000 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions and prevents nearly 1,000 serious long-term health conditions. So I think we're doing well relative to the funding, but the opportunity, as I've highlighted, for example, within the schools programme to do more really exists. And I think the cost-benefit piece that we've done with the schools programme really highlights how, with the little investment that we've got in that programme, the output and the economic payoff is very strong. The opportunity to do more exists, so I think there's plenty of opportunity to do more. I don't know if anyone you want to say anything more.
Yeah, and in terms of the longer term funding, it would be so important and would benefit those engaged with the programme. So for example, with the schools programme, in the last 4 years we've been through 4 different contracts, and in the approach to some of those contracts ending, it's been less than a month before we've known whether or not there's going to be an extension or a new contract. And that's been very disruptive to the schools engaged in the programme, because they're trying to set up their school development plans for the next year and they don't know whether to factor in support from Sustrans and their involvement in the programme. It means that our team, we've lost people because they've felt unstable with their jobs, and so they've needed to go elsewhere. So we've lost really key good people. So it is disruptive, and it would be really beneficial to the programme to have that longer than a 6-month or longer than 12-month contract to do more meaningful work.
And behaviour change takes time as well. You know, it's a journey, forgive the pun, but you know, it takes time for people to begin to think about travelling differently, and there's a bit of a culture shift to be achieved here in Northern Ireland around how we do move. As I highlighted, you know, we're living in a very car-dominated society. The infrastructure piece as well, you know, infrastructure takes time. I don't know, Perla, if you want to say something.
This impacts as well, like how we're planning and delivering and phasing out the different infrastructure, whether it is Greenway or Urban Cycle Network, and how the kind of collaboration, coordination between councils as well as happening on understanding what is going to be delivered when, and having a bit of a longer investment sort of helps engage communities on the long term, because sometimes when it's just short-term funding, within 3 months you're planning to deliver infrastructure to design it, communities are approached but not really engaged. They're not really taking that as their own, and it's not being designed with them, and that does take time. So we need to start maybe thinking of the structure a little bit differently on how behavior change and infrastructure go together, and how does that look as a longer term delivery plan, and then set the investment based on that.
Yeah, no, like I firmly agree. I think if the department is truly serious, and I believe that it is, but it needs to show that through sustainable funding, that it wants to see active travel, that it wants to see 10% of the budget spent in active travel, it wants to get more people cycling to work and walking to work and scooting to work, that it needs to not just find the money, but ensure that, you know, there's a rolling contract that you can actually see, rather than being faced with that cliff edge every single time, because I know from other organisations we speak to that it's virtually impossible to forward plan and to do any of that critical work that you want to going forward. In terms of funding outside of the Public Health Agency and the departments, has there been any collaboration with other councils or private sector organisations to fund some of the schemes, and is that something that can be looked at going forward to develop as well?
We have worked with councils in the past in terms of, particularly in the area that Perla works in, supporting councils to look at master planning around routes and networks development. So we're speaking to councils constantly. I mean, money is just tight everywhere, and that's what we're facing. And on the private sector front, that's something that we are looking at as a team across Sustrans as an organisation, looking at working with corporates and how they might invest in programmes, either particularly, I suppose, for their staff, well-being, and how they move about and what that brings to a city where they're based, but also in terms of supporting some of the other work that we would do.
Before bringing other members, just want to touch then on the fantastic Active Schools programme, because I know my kids have availed of it, and so many schools in my constituency, and I'm sure other members' constituencies avail of it as well. It's fantastic to see young people walking, cycling, scooting to work and to school. And not that they're working yet, but you know what I mean. I think it's really good. But you talked about the fact that that it's now oversubscribed. That is down to funding, or is that down to personnel as well, unable to, or is it a combination of both?
It's the structure of the contract that's been set out by DFI and PHA, and so it's probably related back to funding.
Yes.
How many staff that we can resource. And the setup of the programme.
How far do you think that, for example, could get to if the funding model was changed to encourage more schools to uptake it? Is it unlimited?
Yeah, I think it could be, because at the moment the ratio of one of my staff people to the number of schools is really large. So each of my team members are working directly with 30 schools each year. So that means their time for each school is very limited, whereas our colleagues across the water would work with maybe 10 to 12 schools, so they would be able to give more intensive support and engagement in the school. So if we were able to build up our team, we could work with more schools, but we could also do more meaningful work with less number of schools per officer.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing the way it's changed. I walked to school, I don't consider myself that old, but everyone seemed to walk to school back in the day. And now whenever you drop the kids off at school, it's pandemonium. And I think this solves two issues. It gets children being active, but it takes away those massive pinch points at schools that were not designed for hundreds or thousands of cars every single morning. And the fact that you've identified that, is so important. The final point I want to tease out then is just how we encourage that further in the areas maybe where there is maybe less reception to it, whether it's be rural areas or areas where parents might think it's not the safest way to travel down. Is that about changing what you referred to in terms of the access to it and the safe and the networks for it, basically?
Yeah, I think the reach, I mean, we do work urban and rural. Beth can say more about this, but I suppose the reach in the rural areas, you know, the infrastructure is particularly important there in terms of what is there for families and pupils to avail of. But Beth, you want to say more?
Yeah, I think at the moment of our engaged schools, it's about 55% urban, 45% rural, so it's quite even. And a lot of those rural schools, they are super keen. They really do want to take part in a program. For some schools that have no safe infrastructure, what they're taking part in is giving their kids life skills that they can then go use at home, in their communities, in their neighborhoods, or when they become older. But also for a number of rural schools, maybe more of the village ones, the Park and Stride option is very much available and it is an accessible option for families. So that's something that we really work to put in place at a school, is to get some families to drive part of the way, have a safe location to park up, and then walk or cycle the rest of the way into school. And that again relieves the congestion outside the schools and gives kids a bit of exercise in the morning too.
Okay, that's all for me for now. I'm probably coming again. We're going to move to Danny.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. I suppose it's been touched on, and if I just look at my own area, most of my journeys are within 1 mile, maybe 1.5 miles. I'm going to be ashamedly admitting this here that since COVID, I've been working off one car family. I'm probably going to have to now move to a 2 car, because I know. And it's not my furthest journey is to come here. But that's easy, and go on the glider, which is brilliant, and get you up here if I don't have the car. It is the short journeys. So if I want to bring the kids, and it's their activities really that is driving this. Their training's probably 0.8 of a mile from my house. I can't cycle them down there. Yes, I could walk sometimes if time is on my side, not always. But it's the cycling. So it's only small, safe routes that I think within a community. I'm from the Colin, it is a town, it's 30,000 people live in it, but all our journeys are less than a mile. If them wee routes, them small routes into the leisure centre, into our school, were there, car dependency in my community would drop significantly. Yeah. And I suppose that's probably a question for the guys at the back, but it was in that they're changing. There's only so much behaviours we can change, and I suppose my question to that is that how long can we sustain behavioural change without the infrastructure, because people will change their behaviours again even after all the great work that you're doing.
Yeah. On the behaviour change piece, I mean, there's always people coming through who are always wanting to learn, so that's an ongoing piece, and it is a journey of time and confidence and skills. But you're right, without the infrastructure, you know, there's maybe a limit in terms of who we're going to reach. There is a study that we worked on for the department, the Colin Active Travel.
I read it.
Study. So that
on a shelf somewhere.
That piece is there that identified all those linkages that you're talking about. And Perla, you maybe want to say more, but you're right. I mean, those are the pieces that need to now happen.
Yeah. I think what's important, I know there's a lot of strategies and plan right now that are underway to try to connect the network more together. But I think like sometimes when investments, you know, are going to be put towards modal shifts, we're going to focus on major connections. So I think it's important to start thinking of that parallel program of nodal roads. So if we're delivering the greenways that are connecting inter-council areas, or they are connecting, you know, those big with public transport, with park and ride sites, so like you're mixing the modal shifts, it's important in parallel to start looking at the neighborhoods that are off these main roads where key cycle, maybe, you know, segregated cycling infrastructure are gonna be, but then look at, okay, so what is happening now in those back neighborhoods? And that is where the linkage to services, to schools, where streets become safer because cars are no longer dominating those streets because people have done so. I think it's kind of like a chain and a link, but as we are planning, that's where the likes of the school street program become important. That's where like the neighborhood master plan on the low level, engaging the community, those becomes the little projects where you're actually having the neighborhood engage into designing their streets, into actively seeing how their streets would transform, what do they want from their streets, and then it starts connecting to the key services that are within those areas. So I think like starting to look at how we have the main cycle routes, yes, we're gonna pour the investments in them because they are the most costly and we wanna see like maybe bigger impact, but then not to leave behind that thinking process with the local communities.
Yes. Absolutely, because I would love to be able to cycle the Greenway and all that, but for me, that wee internal connection would be perfect. And I promise that I haven't done the 2 car yet. I'm still holding on. I'm trying my best. I really am trying my best. Just one more wee question would be, I suppose a game changer could be electric bikes. Well, especially hilly areas. Again, I'll talk about my own areas. Like there's a 1 mile hill up to my house, but I suppose affordability in that there and your view on that, because they're very expensive.
They are expensive. So through our programs, particularly the workplace program, we offer a bike loan scheme. So the idea of that is that someone can try out the different types of bike firstly. So addressing your point of what's out there, so there's a whole range of different bikes for people with different needs. So we offer a scheme where people can try out some of the different bikes we have to see what fits best with the journeys they're making. On affordability, we obviously support the Cycle to Work scheme. We point people to that in terms of availing of that. And I think it's the Belfast Trust has just introduced, there's a new scheme now, because the threshold for that has been quite high, and there's a lot of people who don't meet the threshold to be eligible for the Cycle to Work scheme. There's a new scheme coming out to support those on lower wage levels to access that. But certainly, the Belfast Bike Scheme is there in terms of people having access to bikes, in the city area. And again, we would encourage people through our programs to make use of those. But equally, we try and facilitate access to different types of bikes through some of our work as well. It's definitely something that's a barrier. It's something you'd like to see in terms of expanding the schools program access to bikes as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommy. Andrew, for yourself.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for coming in. Happy Bike Week. I've got my bike shirt on. People always comment on our attire, but my shirt has bikes on it, so that's good. That's the reason. And I did try and bike part of the way here today. I didn't usually get the bus and then bike in, but I got. And again, as you said about different modes of bike, I mean, any cyclist knows it's N+1. You know what I mean? The amount of bikes you have. So gravel bikes, mountain bikes, all that. So it's just I suppose there's loads to take out of that. I mean, I think it's so good what you're doing. One thing that sort of, and it has sort of been touched on as well, it's how, I represent sort of South Down, which is not Colin by any stretch of the imagination, it's still hilly, but it's not the same sort of urban intensity, if that makes sense. But at the same time, a lot of the urban solutions are what are rural solutions too. And I suppose how do you go about managing those things, and how do you go about, are there different strategies? I mean, one thing I always hear about is, and it's maybe more question for the next presentation, is sort of quiet roads and stuff like that. And I just never see that infrastructure being put in order to quieten down the roads. And again, I've got more questions, Sarah, I hope you don't mind, but because that's going to lead on to something else. So what's sort of the views around that there, I suppose?
Yeah, that's like really key in rural areas when we're looking at that interconnectivity that I touched on, like the nodal routes, what we call. And those are like quiet lanes, and that could really vary in areas depending on what you're connecting, like what is already there and what you're connecting together. Is it services? Do you want to focus on actually connecting the schools? Do you want to focus on connecting to a public transport hub? So that's where it becomes like an in situ difference of how you treat those quiet lanes. But those would be in places where it then becomes where you have your active travel infrastructure or your greenway, and like segregated. But if it was to be then shared, those before in rural areas were roads where there wasn't much cars. So that's where they used to be part of our national cycle network that are now declassified because they're no longer safe, right? But then that's where safety measures become from better, let's say, reducing speeds on those connectivity routes that would then be met, because maybe it's not the entire routes, but it's those sections that are connecting you to places. So speed limits, better signages, like highlighting what is the road user hierarchy in this area, so it could become then transformed into the quiet lane that it was before, if there wasn't room to create that segregated cycle lane.
No, that's great to hear. I suppose it's our job now to help you guys push that, to put it in place, because again, some of the back roads are quicker than some of the main roads. I mean, that's just and they're narrow. Anyway, that's that. I suppose I come at this from I do a bit of mountain biking, so my risk perceptions are maybe slightly different than other cyclists, so that's okay. But one of the big barriers, and you guys talk about it as well, is people don't feel safe cycling, okay? And that's just that's the bare bones of it. Okay, so I suppose it's a twofold question in that how do we, there's risk perception and then there's actual risk. Okay, so how do we reduce the actual risk, but also how do we, put forward that risk, it's a minimal risk, and this is the benefits. I talk about risk benefit quite an awful lot. The benefits are so much more than the risks. So how do we? You quote that figure of only 1% cycle, like that's crazy. You know what I mean? I cycled, from essentially what is South Belfast to here today, and like you're cycling along, and you look at the traffic, and dear love them, there's single people in single cars, and like the risk to that. For that lifestyle, that is surely more. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the combination of behaviour change and infrastructure, safe infrastructure. I mean, one of the pieces of research we've done over the years is asking people why. Well, what would motivate them to make a change to travelling actively? And it was all around the health focus. So people are quite selfish, so they'll do something if they think it benefits them. And then obviously the wider benefits that we all get come from that when someone makes a change. And also when they start, if they identified health as the main motivator, and when they start then travelling actively, they start to realise the other benefits like the financial savings, the reliable journey time, all of those pieces come that they're helping the environment. But first and foremost, we found that the motivator people identified was health. So we would put a lot of messaging out around the health benefits. And when we asked people what the barriers were, it was safety, as you say, and the lack of knowledge around safe, segregated, active travel infrastructure. So there's definitely a piece of training around giving people the confidence to travel, by bike, wherever it is they're going, and whether that's a mixture of safe and segregated routes or on quiet roads. But then there's definitely the need to provide the safe physical infrastructure for people, and that's just, it's always up there, as you say.
Yeah, like I guess it's a demonstration. Like what would change people's mindset and behavior towards this is actually demonstrating that it is safe, and you cannot do that without having the implemented infrastructure accompanied to showcase that. And you would be surprised, like by sometimes we're delivering big schemes, right? And you wonder how much impact you're making on like an individual level. But then when you have those conversations with people you'd be surprised how many people do not know how to cycle or do not even have the confidence to get on a bike, even though they don't own a car. So when we're working with communities like that, I was surprised to see one recently last year along the Stranmillis embankment. And that's the only segregated cycle lane facing Botanic that we have that I consider the most safety. And the people living in Holy Land, there's communities where the ladies wouldn't even cross the street on a bike to get to that. And then part of the training, so we worked with them last year, so part of the training, they were now doing their local shopping on the bike. And that just shows you sometimes, yes, taking it back to that one person's story, but I guess sharing those stories as well is part of like the behavior change program that happen of people talking about their journeys, but that has to be accompanied by them experimenting a safe route, because they can't always be accompanied by an experienced cyclist or so it's kind of like those.
Two more points rather than questions, Sharon. Honestly, I think it's important that sort of that sharing the story, if that makes sense. And I said it wouldn't be a question, but an empirical tipping point. You know what I mean? We talked about is there an empirical tipping? I don't know. One thing I would say, when I was cycling along the day, and I noticed that I have always this thing in my head that whenever you're cycling, how you getting on, any fellow cyclist, that should be a promoted scheme again and again. That might actually, because nobody said hello to me today, I couldn't believe it. Maybe it's just being in Belfast, I don't know. Was it shirt? But
must know you're an MLA.
No, that I think just, and again that might engender the culture of we're all in this together. We're out for the whole principle of if you see someone with a flat tire, you help them. You know what I mean? Just help brothers out, our sisters.
About normalising it. And that the project, and apologies, it was Belfast, the East Belfast Active Travel Hub there. I mean, that was a really good project, as I highlighted, that again met so many agendas, but it combined the behaviour change and the infrastructure opportunity that was around it. And I know that not everywhere is at that point, but it's a really good example of combining infrastructure and behaviour change, and working to try and normalise cycling so that there was a culture in that neighbourhood of people travelling actively. So just like you say, it's a very social thing, and it's better on so many levels, as we know. So yeah.
That's me.
No, it's okay. Just to rise now that before I bring in Keith, I mean, and it goes to the point Danny made as well about his area and Andrew's. Just want to know, in terms of road safety, what sort of input did you have into the road safety strategy, and how important do you think that strategy will be, not just protecting people using active travel, but encouraging them if they think it's somewhere safe that they can then go into use?
Yeah, unfortunately Anne's not here at the moment. I think she responded in terms of that, and it fundamentally comes down to removing the number of cars on the road from our perspective.
Changing mentalities as well, because we'll never do that, but there is a mentality of us versus them. Not that I'm saying that, but you know what I mean. There is, you know, that this is our space and get out of the way, and I think it's changing that mentality as well.
Yeah, it's about the reallocation of road space.
Absolutely.
It's the user priority that Perla talked about, and the provision of safe segregated routes for.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move to Keith now.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, ladies, for coming along. Appreciate the information. Chair touched on funding. I want to get an understanding of your core funding and what your total funding is, and how far it has changed in this past 5 years. So, to give me an understanding.
We don't get core funding.
Sorry?
We don't get any core funding in Northern Ireland for our work. It's all project based funding. And that differs compared to other parts of the UK. Sustrans has received government grants from Transport Scotland, Transport for Wales and Active Travel England around the work that we do. So everything in Northern Ireland here is project based funding. The schools programme is our biggest piece. We've got our workplace programme. And unfortunately, as I highlighted, we took a cut last year from the Public Health Agency around the communities programme. So it's piece by piece project work that we're
There's no certainty at any time?
No.
Like even with the schools programme right now, we're sitting 7 weeks away from the end of our contract, and we don't know what to communicate to schools or to our staff.
What is there a normal figure you get from DFI? I know it's not core, but is there a figure that
for the
broadly year on year you apply and you get, or is it up and down all over the place?
It's yeah. I mean, budgets are an issue. So as Beth said on the schools piece, we're sitting in the last 4 years. We've had very piecemeal funding through tenders and applications and bids for funding. So it's project by project basis.
You touched on 8. You talked about 8 staff. What's the figure to run those 8 staff, or based on projects, roughly year on year, roughly?
Yeah, so this current academic year, the budget has been 390k.
And that's the schools, the active school travel programme alone.
And that was 75k from DFI and 315k from PHA. That was the last academic year.
Okay. And I move on, so thanks for that. I want to move on to a slide here that you're saying sustainable travel makes up just 27% of all journeys. 33% in 2020, so as it came down?
Yeah, it's come down.
So
there's downward.
What has caused that?
Good question in terms of what's caused that. Pardon?
Was that the WACI?
That was the travel survey.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's sustainable travel, not active travel, so it's COVID it's and public transport.
Yes, it's yes.
You think it's public? The COVID has affected those figures? We hope.
Public transport.
Essentially.
And how relevant is that? So if you were to get more money and you're doing more work on schools, what do you see those percentage figures doing?
If you look at the school travel stats that just came out from DFI recently, after a downward trend, there has been an increase in the number of children walking to school. So we are seeing a reflection of, we're only working with a small number of schools compared to all the schools in Northern Ireland, but I think that's showing a reflection of the work that we've been doing in schools. It's starting to be reflected in the Northern Ireland-wide school travel results. So we are seeing an increase in walking to school in those. Okay,
and then one last question. You talked earlier about schools, urban 55, rural 45%, an uptake on the 500 schools, and you add on another, am I right, you add on another 60 per year, is that correct?
So yes, we add 60 each year. Only
on top of the 500?
So how it works is a school gets 3 years of support from an officer, and then they move into what we call the extended support. Okay. So it's just like a light touch at distance support. So the number grows, but the number of schools that are actually getting direct support is about 150, 200. Yeah.
And then the 55-45 figure, 55 urban, 45 rural, what percentage in those is walking? I assume it's more in urban, but do we know out of the 55% of urban schools you're working with, what percentage is walking based on against rural schools walking?
I don't have those numbers to hand, but I can dig that out for you. But yeah, certainly the increases in active travel at the urban schools are larger than we're seeing at the rural schools.
Rural schools is a disadvantage. We can't drive in the roads at the minute because we can't see the road because the grass is lying across the road. So to get anybody to ask their primary school child to walk up the road, it's not going to happen. You know, irrespective of the road, the footpath is not there in a lot of places. So appreciate that's not your issue, but we've difficulty driving up the roads at the minute because we can't see that good road.
I mean, about 15 years ago, we ran a very successful rural Safe Routes to School programme, you know, and that was focused on infrastructure and behaviour change again, and saw good results. But I appreciate that's a challenge.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Keith. Just arising from Keith's point around core funding, with 10% of the entire travel budget intended to be for active travel, do you believe that should make up an element of core funding for?
We've been asking for some sort of kind of core funding to sustain the piece that we can bring in terms of enabling active travel, and I've highlighted how other parts of the UK do receive, other parts of our organisation do receive core funding to deliver on active travel. For
Were we the only parts, Claire, of the United Kingdom and of these isles that don't receive core funding to sustain active travel?
Yes.
Okay.
And just a quick point, what time are you spending trying to achieve funding?
Every day.
Well, that answers the question.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Okay, thank you. Over to Peter.
Thank you, and thank you for coming in. Good to see you all again. I really enjoyed reading the presentation and seeing East Belfast, C.S. Lewis Square, the Greenways mentioned. But I think my point's similar to something that Danny and Andy touched upon in relation to the behavioural piece, but also the longer term infrastructure, sort of capital project piece. Have we learnt any lessons from the Cumber Greenway and the Conswater Greenway? Claire, you mentioned about the fact that the Cumber Greenway straddles 3 local councils, which I've been banging on about since I was a councillor, but they need to transfer that from DFI to the local councils because you can't maintain it. I've always referred to the Cumber Greenway as the poor relation to Conswater. So have you guys learnt any lessons from sort of those 2 really successful projects to maybe implement and deliver greenways at a faster pace?
Yeah, well, the Cumber Greenway was the one we had impact and input directly because Conswater was led by the community and it's not part of the national cycle network. But for the Cumber Greenway, I think because it was really done and delivered and engaging the community, it's actually a successful greenway that we do use as an exemplar. But it's been a while, and it's the only greenway that it's been a while that's been delivered, and I think this is where we wanted to see replicate, and I think there's a lot of good learnings from the Cumber Greenway, but there's a lot to continue to enhance it. So, for example, we do have a barriers as well, a kind of audit and program that we are running on our existing greenways, and there are a couple of accessibility barriers that have been identified on Cumber too, and we would love now to see starting to make those greenways more of an example and pilot, so that when other greenways are being delivered, they are being looked at and used. So the ones that are there and our existing greenways, we're always looking at them and using them. First, how to enhance them, but have to get more people to use them, and trying to audit and see who is not using them and why, and work on those barriers, but also to try to learn how to implement this in the future. And I think Cumber Greenway is a successful sort of implementation of a greenway example that we would love to replicate.
Absolutely it is. I mean, I use it every day for running and cycling, and there's so many people on it. I think if we can get more of those delivered across Northern Ireland, I mean, I recently met with Strabane Greenways and what they're trying to do up there, and if we can just get more greenways, I think more people would use it and more people would cycle. Secondly, the active travel hub down at C.S. Lewis Square, it's really every time I'm down there, it's rammed full of people making use of it. Can you tell us about the numbers of people that are using it, maybe how much money it costs to facilitate that on an annual basis, and are more active travel hubs across Northern Ireland something that you'd like to see?
Yes, so absolutely. I mean, that model of being embedded within a community has really worked for us, and the project that originally established the hub at C.S. Lewis Square, we did some evaluation after that, and 60% of people identified the fact that they were now travelling actively, down to the support that was provided through the measures delivered from the active travel hub. And at that time we saw an increase on both leisure cycling and people commuting to work by bike. by 7% in that area linked to that project. So huge opportunity there to replicate that across other parts of Northern Ireland. Strategically placed hubs, you know, the Northwest Multimodal Transport Hub, we've an active travel centre up there which links directly into the public transport network and the greenways as well, and we're doing our behaviour change engagement. Originally when we set up C.S. Lewis Hub we had some project funding for that. You know, time has passed on and other projects are now sustaining that, and certainly investing properly in a resource to coordinate a really active programme within that neighbourhood would be something that we would be, you know, seeking to achieve.
Just before bringing in Mark Durkin, the chair, Deborah Erskine's chair, is tuned in from rural Fermanagh, and she thanks you for the answer so far. Just one question she wanted to tease out regarding the rural piece. And she'll be glad to know that she's very interested in this, but it's in terms of that rural access, and is curious to know if any modelling's been done from schools and councils that you're engaged with about the extra and additional infrastructure that needs to be in place that DFI could install, whether it be additional cycle lanes, extending footpaths, in order to ensure that regional balance when it comes to active travel, because I think it is an important point.
Yeah, it is.
So as part of the contract of the schools program, we carry out a basic infrastructure audit with each of the schools that join the program, and in that audit we identify needs. We talk to the schools and find out what is it that you feel you would need to encourage more children to walk and cycle to school, and we go out and look at the area as well. It's basic, but it provides some really useful hands-on information, and then we pass it on to the Department for Infrastructure each year.
Yeah,
that happens.
Do they compile an audit or response to that in terms of?
No.
Okay, so just be interested when we go to the next series of questions and what data is being correlated to ensure that regional balance, because I think that is a key aspect of this.
We did engage with the Department for Infrastructure recently on their while they were developing the Northern Ireland Active Travel Delivery Plan, and we engaged with their consultants, and we did. We submitted like the audits, the infrastructure audits, part of that, because they were doing the cycle network audits of different areas, and I think the school data we haven't yet seen, that the output of that, but hopefully soon. But then I believe that data was then used when they were trying to map out key routes and those connectivity routes to school or key areas. That infrastructure audit was taken into consideration as data that they have mapped out and used.
That's just no. Over to the very patient Mark Durkin.
I wouldn't go that far. No, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, ladies. I've found it extremely interesting, and your responses to the many questions that I was going to ask that have been asked. In terms of the 10% of the transport budget, that does present a tremendous opportunity, and I mean, obviously, you'd love to be in a position where it will see your organisation receive core funding and more funding. However, I'm sure you're just delighted in general that there's going to be more investment in something that you're obviously extremely passionate about. What kind of engagement have yourselves had with the department at this stage on that, in terms of identifying, I suppose, how we collectively can get the biggest bang for that buck with regards to reducing emissions, increasing the use of sustainable transport? Although that's confined for active travel rather than sustainable travel, and I wonder, could that be problematic at all in your view?
The fact that it's contained to active travel?
That it's all active travel?
I think that's good, because we should continue to invest in public transport, so we wouldn't want those two budgets to compete. So the 10% is a commitment, their statutory obligation to spend 10% of the transport budget on active travel. So I mean, we're in regular contact with the department officials around opportunities that we see around the programmes that we do deliver on their behalf, and we are aware that sectoral plans are being developed in terms of how this is going to be taken forward, but we await to see the detail on that, and conscious time is passing and this legislation was passed some time ago, and we'd definitely like to hear more in terms of the plan for how that 10% spend is going to be achieved.
Certainly not a problem that you'll be used to, but a situation could arise where there's almost too much money to spend in any given year, and you enter a sort of Brewster's Millions scenario where money might be getting thrown at things left, right and centre that aren't necessarily as impactful as they could or should be.
It's important to plan, but it's important to deliver. And we're a UK-wide organisation as well, with resource across the UK, with experience across the UK, and we can tap into that. So we'd be delighted to be in that position.
And then what sort of relationship then, again thinking about the bang for buck, if you like, at that sustainable piece, I suppose the relationship between active travel and public transport in particular. What sort of partnership work have you got going on with TransLink? I know you are under one roof in Derry in the Northwest Transport Hub. Yeah. You called it a train station. I've been I've got in trouble for that before.
Okay. Apologies for that. So absolutely, we work very closely with TransLink, and Perla might want to say more, but public transport and walking and cycling go hand in hand. It's about moving people sustainably, and we've been speaking to TransLink on a number of fronts, but there's an idea around enabling sustainable journeys. So and Perla, you maybe talk to Mark's part of the world up in the northwest and Derry, London area around thoughts around enabling sustainable journeys and a hilly city and how we might approach that. Perla.
That, and I want to touch back to the Comber Greenway as an example too, because the first approach on enable sustainable journey with TransLink, we looked at an existing greenway and we looked at the key bus routes, and then how do you create more permeability to connect both, because now if you are using active travel on a greenway, you have the start and end point, and the communities in between those start and end point cannot enter or access the greenway, and then vice versa to the key transport, but let's say bus stops, park and ride. So mapping those and seeing, okay, so where is the permeability between them and creating the access. Now we are now sitting on the public transport task force in Derry, Londonderry, like with the council, and we're seeing that as a great opportunity for those discussions. So we've had recent meeting with TransLink to try to look at what are the opportunities to improve the uptake of public transport in an area where maybe it is hilly, and they are focusing on that as a key mode of transport, but where would active travel get people out of their car? Because if, let's say, the public transport is on main streets again, well, people are using their cars to come to it, right? And then they might say, well, it's easy for me to continue by car. So how do you stop that barrier? And it is through planning and through looking at a hilly city kind of in tranches and starting to work on like loops by loops to take. So public transport would do, if you want, like that linkages bit, and active travel will be the neighborhood level on the different kind of morphology, levels of the morphology. So it's an interesting approach that we are trying to hopefully soon present to the task force and see how the planning goes from there. But I think there's a lot of opportunities, and we are in constant collaboration together.
And I do have first-hand experience of the transformational impact that infrastructural change can have. I live in Strathfoyle and live literally like 20 metres from the start adjoining point of the Greenway. I can cycle to my office in the Strand Road now in 20 minutes. That's if I go the scenic route over the Peace Bridge. Yeah. I can do it in a bit less if I go the sweaty route over the Foyle Bridge. But I stick to the flatter one. And then there are a lot of hills in the city, so we get into the office and then someone says, "Oh, Mark, you've a meeting in Craig and at 10:30. It's like, taxi. But that sort of interconnection, connective work is extremely important. And see, as regards, I was thinking of it when Danny was speaking those short journeys, and again how this ties in with the Active Schools programme, your role, and I suppose or the role that you can have in helping identify those safe routes and the views a way to feed in to DFI, and I know I'll speak to the guys on this later as to what small infrastructural, be it signage, traffic calming improvements could be made to increase the uptake of cycling in those areas for just those short local journeys for children in particular. Because I know now in terms of like traffic calming schemes and that, there's been very few of them done lately due to budgetary concerns, and I wonder, are the department viewing this 10% as an opportunity to roll out some of them in a way that will facilitate an increase in active travel as well?
We hope so. In the schools, we have a captive audience, and one of the biggest challenges to delivering kind of infrastructure and, the cultural issues that we've talked about in terms of how we have a car-dominated society. People need to think differently about how they move, and that's going to be hard for some people. So one of the points about the layering on the infrastructure to the active school travel programme is that we do have that really engaged audience there. So, not only do we need the infrastructure to then have a greater impact, but you've got that audience buy-in already. They're a willing community to work with to start making a change that starts shifting the culture about how we travel and what the norm is to travel. So the safe routes to schools piece that we talked about, wanting to expand onto the active school travel programme, and the school streets piece are so important. Yeah. It can be something as simple. The infrastructure audit that Beth's team do is interesting. It can sometimes just be as simple as but a crossing, and there's an example again up in the northwest. Donna or Stephen last year was trying to bring a school down to the Greenway at the Active Travel Centre, and the teacher just wasn't for it because she wasn't walking her whole class across a road that didn't have a crossing. And that's a barrier for that whole cohort of people and their families to get down and experience what's on offer at the Active Travel Centre, and then onwards to out the Greenway.
Yeah. Okay. And I had one more, but it's left. Thank you.
And come back to Mark if needs be.
Yep.
Stephen Dunn.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks folks for your presentation, and it's good to hear the progress, and particularly the schools programme is very valuable indeed, and I think it is positive to see such a spread right across the province of 500. Do you find that schools are very receptive to working with yourselves, and it'd be fair to say you could do a lot more with more?
Yes, absolutely. I think this programme ticks a lot of boxes for schools because it's addressing the congestion problem, which so many of us see outside of schools all the time. It's a real problem for schools. And it also tackles the health issues that schools are seeing with children, the low levels of physical activity. Building physical activity into their daily journeys to and from school is an easy way to increase children's physical activity levels. So it's a win-win for schools. They're very keen to take part, and they don't feel confident to do it themselves. So a lot of schools would say, yeah, we'd like to see more kids walking and cycling to school, but we're scared to go there. We don't know what language to use, how to pass on the right kind of skills. So we're able to step in and to do that for them. Yeah, and I think there is, been touched upon, there is real road safety risks and issues across so many of our schools, even locally and within North Down. In recent weeks, we have near misses with children. One young kid was out on a scooter, and he narrowly, the car didn't stop at the red light, and he thankfully just avoided being hit. But there is real issues, and we're always pushing for the 20-mile-an-hour zones and so on, measures like that. But no, appreciate that. Just one other issue on the Bangor to Newton Ards Greenway. I know you'd be keen just to hear your level of involvement with that particular Greenway route, which is in the planning stage, I understand. Is there any update on that?
We're not really directly involved in the delivery.
But up to this point, have you been involved with the Bangor Newton Ards scheme much? No. Right. No, that's okay. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Just very quickly, I think Andrew wants to come back in.
Just touching on the school, because you mentioned the the omissions and journeys saved, but is there an educational benefit to the children? Is that something that you've tapped into? Obviously it's a great sell, no cars, but actually, is there another tangent there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are studies that show that kids who have an active journey to school are more alert and awake and ready to go, and so they perform better in the classroom. So there are studies out there that show that. Even the program itself, my team deliver a lot of lessons that link active travel with the curriculum. So whether that's history or geography or health, we can make those nice ties and connections, so kids are learning both about active travel and about whatever curriculum topics they have. So yeah, absolutely. And in fact, one of the calls that we have that you would have seen in the slide is we'd really like to see active travel included in the curriculum so that it is a core part of the school life, and schools build it into their planning and into their priorities. I think that would be really important.
Thank you, sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Pardon my absolute naivety. It's been a few years since I passed my cycling proficiency test. Is that still a thing in schools?
It is, yeah.
Completely, because I haven't seen it rolled out as much.
Yeah, so that is run by the department, so that they would be able to tell you more about that. But
Look
yes,
forward to hear talking about that.
it's still happening. Yes.
Excellent. Look, Claire, Perla and Beth, you've been very patient with us. Thank you so much for your questions and for listening to all the anecdotes from the members on cycling as well, which I'm sure you enjoyed as much as the questions. We thank you for your time today. We've run slightly over, but I think it's a really important topic and the one that members are really keen to touch in and to get answers on. So we'll continue to engage and we look forward to hearing from you again. And thank you very much for coming along today.
Thank you very much.
And do you know, if the members in due course would like to come out and visit one of the schools as part of the programme, if it's still running after July, we would be delighted to facilitate the committee.
That would be very good. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
On your bike.
On your bike, especially in bike week.
Nice as possible though.
Okay, members, we'll move to item 8 now, which is a active travel department infrastructure or evidence. At page 106, the clerk's memo, and page 109 of your pack is the written evidence from the Department of Infrastructure. And just want to seek members' agreement to record this by Hansard, if we're happy.
Yep.
And we now welcome Colin Hutchison, who's the Director of Active Travel for Department of Infrastructure, and Peter McParland, who's the Deputy Director of Active Travel. So Colin and Peter, you're very welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience there. In typical fashion, we run over when it comes to our questioning, but just shows the members' interest in this one. So as before, if you want to set off, we have already got the information that you've sent. We've only take 5-10 minutes just to brief members on how it's going within the department, and then as usual we'll head into questions for as long as it takes within reason. Okay, so over to yourself.
Morning, Chair and members, and thanks for the opportunity to give you an update on where we are with the active travel delivery from within the department. As I say, I'm Colin Hutchinson. I'm actually the Director of the A5 Western Transport Corridor and Active Travel within the department, so I think I'll see you again next week as well. And with me is Peter McParland, who is the Head of Active Travel within the department. There are a few areas that I'd like to just cover. I can probably shorten what I say, given what you just heard, to avoid any duplication. Just for clarity, the active travel, as we have it defined, is travelling by physically active means such as walking, wheeling, and cycling. It's a great opportunity for anybody from a personal perspective, to increase their health levels, their fitness levels, but also to save money in their pocket, and also to contribute to improving the environment as well. So it's definitely a very important aspect for us. I thought it would be useful to set maybe a wee bit of context as to what the structure of active travel is within the department. So it's only really in recent years, in the introduction not that many years ago of the Blue Green Fund, that we actually set up dedicated teams within the divisions to deliver active travel. We still have our traffic teams who are responsible for delivering all of our local transport and safety measures, and there's a major overlap between the two teams. The active travel teams within the divisions tend to be taking forward the larger active travel infrastructure schemes. We have an active travel headquarters team as well, and to put in context, I think we had in that whole active travel team this time last year, we had about 20 people in that team, and the structure wasn't much greater than that. We have an approved structure now of about 59 posts within that, and we have about 30 of those posts actually filled. So I think the Minister said publicly quite recently in some social media promoting active travel that we really are at the start of the journey here with it, and there's lots of opportunities ahead of us. One of the areas, there are a number of challenges for us, and that is one of the key areas of getting properly experienced and qualified people into those posts, but we are making slow headway on that, and you'll have heard evidence from other officials within the department that that's a problem across the board in filling posts. And the second thing I just touch upon very briefly is the Climate Change Act itself. So it's been stated clearly that the Climate Change Act requires the department spends at least 10% of the transport budget on active travel moving forward. and that in itself is a really big challenge. I think it was touched upon about ramping up from what we spend now, which I think we included in the pack, the paper to you, that is 10 to 12 million per year is what we've been spending, to a considerably higher figure than that, and work is actually ongoing at the moment to identify exactly what that is. The Act doesn't define quite a number of things, but it doesn't define what the transport budget actually is and which elements of the department's budget make up that transport budget. So we have a paper almost ready to go to the Minister for the Minister to give consideration just to that, which will then tell us what that figure, what our interpretation of that figure would actually be. But regardless of what the figure is, it's going to be considerably more than what we're delivering at the moment. And since coming into post on the active travel front in November in 22 and Peter in August of last year, our task has been to transform how we deliver active travel, and the work that we've been doing over the past year has been enabling work to ensure that as we move forward, we've got the procedures and we've got the capacity to deliver and ramp up. So on the ramping up front, there are a number of things that we have done. First and foremost, you've heard from the witnesses or the members from Sustrans that we have an active travel delivery plan for Northern Ireland, which we commissioned some time ago, almost a year ago. And what that's looking to do is for our major towns and our larger towns and cities to define what active travel should be provided within those towns and cities, and how we connect those towns and cities. And that will join up with the BCA and the Belfast Cycle Network Plan, and also the Greenways Plan, to try and provide proper connectivity. So one of the problems that we were having in the past few years for the divisional teams to deliver was we were always looking at the schemes, the low-hanging fruit, the quick wins, and we needed to have a much more strategic plan to join up the entire, to provide a really good connected network across Northern Ireland. And whilst that focuses on the 42 urban towns with a population of greater than 5,000, we do completely acknowledge that the rural areas have to have connectivity as well. That will be done through Greenways and through providing footway links and cycle links in those areas as well. A part of the commission that we currently have on that active travel delivery plan, one very important part is an update to the design guidance that we use. And what we're completely fundamentally changing the design guidance and how we look at cycle infrastructure. And it's taken account of best practice across the other three nations and the Republic. And we've worked closely with them in developing that, and we feel that we're going to have a very good design guidance which will allow the future infrastructure to be high quality active travel infrastructure, connecting across the network. We've also changed how we procure our supply chain. One of the barriers that we've had over recent years was capacity, not just with staff internally, but with our consultant partners to deliver designs and supervision. There's been tensions or conflicts as to what takes priority, active travel or a accident remedial scheme or traffic calming scheme or whatever it happens to be. So what we've done and is currently out for procurement is the partner consultant who sits very closely with our internal consultancy team. Instead of having one partner as we currently have, we're procuring two. So we're going to have a consultancy partner who can deliver designs and supervision for north and south, and one for west and east. So it's doubling up on the capacity that we have. And that's for schemes less than 5 million, and for schemes greater than 5 million, which would be the bigger greenways, we have already re-procured our major projects framework commission, with active travel very much at the forefront of that to help councils to deliver on the greenways. We've also worked on the greenway side. We've worked very closely with councils over the last year to try and understand how we as a department can help them deliver greenways in a more efficient manner. And I have to say the outcome is that one process just does not fit all. They all have different ways of doing things, they have different strengths, but we are committed to ensure that we help them moving forward. We would contribute about 50% funding to greenways. The councils would take the lead generally on those, but we've worked very closely with them to try and understand what their 5-year outlook is, so that we have a proper plan for a proper delivery plan, not just aspirations or a strategy, but a proper delivery plan for greenways moving forward. Some councils are ahead of other councils on that, and we want to bring them all up to the same level. Over the past 5 years, we have invested about £17 million on greenways. Just very briefly, on delivery over the past couple of years, we've completed schemes such as the Lang Gateway, Strathfoyle Greenway, and Jane Shore Downpatrick. We have, in the last 2 years, have over 100 schemes amongst those 4 divisions on the go, whether it's in design or in construction, and we've delivered roughly about 20 million on that. We've worked with the City and Growth deal teams. We've committed funding for the Lagan pedestrian cycle bridge, which is an absolutely key infrastructure to deliver on the Belfast cycle network, and also in the Strabane pedestrian and cycle bridge, which is part of that deal as well. On the Belfast cycle network, whilst we have been behind on the delivery of that there, we believe that what we've done in the past year should bring the majority of the short-term schemes to fruition in 2025, broadly in line with what the original plan had set out. And finally, and last but not least, I suppose the behavioural change side of things. It's absolutely key. We took a few people in the team over to the Netherlands last year, and we actually witnessed firsthand not just the quality of the infrastructure that they have in place. They've been doing this since the 60s, so they're generations ahead of us. But behavioural change is absolutely key. We need to make sure that we do educate everybody, but starting in schools is really important, so that if you're brought up with cycling as what you do, you're more likely as an adult then to be continuing to cycle and promoting that within your peers. There are 50% of children who live within 1 mile of their schools, and 22% of car journeys are under 2 miles. So we totally recognise that there, and one of our focuses is going to be safer routes to school, and that will be a combination of behavioural change and infrastructure. Now, I think somebody mentioned earlier on about there are simple things that you can do in school streets, and that's absolutely right. So we have actually got 3 pilots identified where we will do that combination. It may well be, like we put in some traffic calming, we reduce speeds on the streets, on the schools, at the schools. Interestingly, in the Netherlands, they don't ban the cars from school streets, but they have a saying that the car is the guest, and again, that's down to behavioural change. It would be great if we could be there, that in any of, not just in school streets, but on any street, that the pedestrian and cyclist have not just on paper given priority, but in people's minds given priority. So we talked about 3 different programmes. We talked about you talked earlier on cycling proficiency. I'll not say too much about it. I'm sure you'll maybe cover that. There's also the practical child pedestrian safety training, which we provided you with some information on as well. And there's the Active Schools Travel Programme, which is absolutely, I think it's the flagship programme. what I'd like to see that programme do in the future is be developed and expanded, not just to be a behavioural change programme for school children, a much wider change programme for the whole of society. So that's hopefully give you a bit of a feel that we are doing an awful lot of work. We are at the start of the journey at this point in time. There are so many things that we can positively do to change active travel in Northern Ireland.
Okay, Colin, Peter, thank you very much for that. A couple of questions for myself, and then I'll open up the floor to members. I'm just going to focus on funding and then around delivery plans, and then tease out some of the issues that we discussed in the previous evidence session, because I think there was quite a bit that came out of that. In terms of funding, the paper that you submitted says that significantly more capital investment will be required than has historically been the case. What is the indicative allocation for active travel 24-25, and how does that compare to previous years?
So, as you'll be aware at this point in time, that it is indicative, as you've said. Any budgets are subject to quality screening, but the capital allocation for next year is going to be somewhere close to double what it is this year, which is again is a clear indication from the Minister as to what priority is placed on active travel. While that's a significant increase, how far short does that fall from where it needs to be to tick the active target deliveries? So I don't want to get into what that number of what 10% actually is. It's multi. Is that still up for debate? Basically, is what you're saying effectively. It is again. It's back to the Climate Change Act. There's quite a few things that didn't define, and one of the things is what is the transport budget, and you could argue that certain things are in and certain things are out. I think the key point around the 10% is that it's money that has to come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. So if the department get no more money in the budget, and the 10% has to come out of the department's budget, that means that there's another critical service which is not going to be funded, and those are really, really tough decisions. Or if it were to be top sliced before departments get it, again it's difficult decisions because it's money that other departments wouldn't get as well. So it's great from an active travel perspective to say we've got 10% coming, and if we get 10% year on year, it gives you much more certainty. But there are difficult questions and decisions around just as to where that 10% will come from. Absolutely. I think everyone's really aware of just how big the pressures are on public finances across every department, but the reality is this is now statutory obligated, and it's got to be, I suppose, in that respect fine once it's properly defined by what it represents. One thing it would be interesting to know, though, because we heard in the previous session about the amount spent per head in other areas of the UK and these islands. I just want to know what that would be comparative to Northern Ireland. We know what it's at now. Where does it need to get to be in the realms per head? I don't have the figures in front of me today, but it depends on which nation that you're looking at. Some are better than others, and certainly even going back 2 or 3 years ago, which was the last figures I had seen, we weren't that far behind at that point in time with, I think it was Highways England. But we don't have the figures right in front of us here now, but we could certainly give you that as a provide that information.
There's probably also worth mentioning that you need to be careful of comparing apples and oranges when you're comparing active travel expenditure with other regions, because there's different functions that are carried out at local authority level in other nations that is carried out centrally by Department for Infrastructure in Northern Ireland. So in all of those calculations or any analysis on that, we'd need to be just sure that we're comparing apples with apples when we talk about spend per head of population. Okay.
I think it is fair to say that we are. But if you take the South for example, they're now spending in the high 300 million pounds per year, and they've ramped up from 150, 200 a couple of years ago. We've been working quite closely with them, looking at the model that they've put in place to actually deliver that there, and we've unapologetically copied a lot of the good things that
best way to do it, steal the models of best
they've
practice
done and what's worked for them, and avoided the stuff that hasn't worked for them as well.
In terms just of vacancy rates within the department, obviously that will be key in having the right people in the right places with the right skills. How big a pressure is that on the department, and particularly within active travel?
Very much so. A new section, relatively speaking, and the 59 staff structure was only approved last year, and we've been taking every opportunity that we can to actually fill that. But what we don't want to do is just steal from another part of the department who are under serious pressure as well. But in saying that, we have offers out to an additional 4 people just in the past week or so. So hopefully filling key roles such as the behavioural change role within the department, the greenways role within the department. We've been focusing on it with a very small number of people. We've been allowing the divisions to continue doing what they're doing to deliver to the capacity that they can, and we've been focusing on putting in place the processes and the things that I'd mentioned earlier on around procurement and so on and so forth, so that we have a consultancy support framework which we can really rely on. And it's key to mention there too that 5 years ago, even our consultant colleagues would have limited experience in delivering active travel. I think it's moved from being a niche of expertise to being more globally. All consultants who are working in the global market have got the teams there to do that. And what I want to do is make sure that we move to a point where every consultant that we have has got great pool of experienced people in being able to design and deliver active travel schemes, and ensure that we internally in the department have those similarly experienced people delivering the entire programme.
Okay, in terms of delivery plans then, and I suppose it follows on from the point I made regarding the Chair's concerns about regional balance and rural versus urban. The delivery plan paper states that it will focus primarily on urban areas. Just wanting to know what the impact of the department is in terms of how the rural areas will be impacted about this, and will rural impact assessments be undertaken as part of the public consultation?
Yeah, they most definitely will be. I think the purpose, the reason for the approach to date is to try and focus on where there is most potential for modal shift. So we have to recognise that, and we have to prioritise that, but we cannot be in a position where we just then ignore I think we've got 42 settlements of over 5,000 and 500 of less than 5,000 according to the statistics. So I think we will continue, and we'll have to do. We haven't finalised our position in this. We need to speak to the Minister about this as well. So decisions need to be taken on that. But certainly we'll be putting options forward which continue the position that we currently are in. If we get a request for rural footway or cycle linkage, that we assess that and prioritise that as well. So they certainly won't be forgotten about. How the exact model looks, we haven't got to that point today. The other two things to mention, greenways are both urban and rural, but generally more rural, and that will be good connectivity in rural environments. And also the safer routes to school will not be urban based only, it will be across all of the schools, rural or urban.
That takes me to a final point then, Colin. You'd be glad to know before I open up the members. You said at the end of your presentation about behavioural change, and I don't think any of us underestimate the challenge of that. I think that is potentially, I mean, we can throw as much money as we want in infrastructure networks, but if we can't change mentalities, then it's a busted flush. And to that end, the Active Skills programme is massive. And again, we take our hat off to Sustrans and the work that's being done there. But we heard about the impacts of the lack of core funding and recurring funding, and how the project effectively been stifled because it doesn't have that additional funding. I mean, is there a plan within the departments going forward to look at core funding for the likes of Sustrans to expand that? And I know you touched on that too, even outside of schools, into community groups and into youth clubs and wherever it can reach. I think that the potential there is endless.
There's a number of points there. So what we want to do, as I said before, is move away from a niche in expertise within active travel. We need to make sure that everybody that's involved in delivering active travel knows it inside out. But Sustrans have an absolutely key role. Sustrans have had a key role up to now and will continue to have a key role. they're heavily involved in the active travel delivery plan that we have, and there's behavioural change elements within that there. We've encouraged Sustrans to be partnered with a lot of all of the consultants that are going to be delivering both in the less than 5 million and the greater than 5 million commissions, because they bring an expertise there to that. Probably and we have to properly procure these commissions moving forward as well. With regards to the active schools travel programme, say this time last year we were in a position where we were going to have to cut the entire programme because of the position that we were in. I was a very strong advocate within the department that we don't cut it. We had to slash it and reduce probably by about 50% of the latter part of the funding. So I have been a strong advocate for it. Totally get that it is key, and we did continue the programme last year. You touched upon it, or somebody touched upon it earlier on. Single year budgets are not a sustainable way to be able to manage any programme or project.
I don't believe we've ever had a multi-year budget here.
No, so if we had, it's not just programmes like that there, it's even just a simple project. If we're going to commit to a project that's going to take 3 years, it's very, very, very difficult to do unless it's a project, a flagship project which has funding set aside for it at that level. So yeah, I totally advocate if we could move away from single year budgets to 3 year budgets. But we have in the indicative, the other thing to point out, and this is very important, the behavioural change work is resource, as opposed to all of the infrastructure work generally is capital. And we know that there's an extra pressure there on the resource side. I know there's pressure on the capital side, there's no doubt about that, but the resource pressures are much more acute. But the indicative resource budget, which I think was published last night, with the EQIA, was published last night on it. Is currently out for that equality assessment. Hopefully will allow for the programme to continue until, I think, for the rest of this at the end of August, is it?
We're currently working on a modification to the current contract, so I'm discussing with Claire in the past week and also colleagues in CPD with regards to a short modification to the existing contract to ensure that there's no gap in provision into the next academic year. But we're also actively working with colleagues in CPD with regards to the next active travel school contract.
It's useful. Finally, members, before I move, I did ask about cycling proficiency previously. It was remiss of me not to realise it was a department funded. Can you just talk me through the level of uptake and the level of funding provided to cycling proficiencies and what plans there are to roll that out? It did feel, and I don't believe to myself anyway, that it was much more prevalent a number of years ago than it is now, but maybe that's not what the stats bear out.
I think from my knowledge of it, there was a drop off obviously in COVID, yes. COVID times, but pre-COVID, I think we were close to the 300 schools being covered in it, which is 40% of P7, P7s, and it is a really important programme. And this year, again, we're back up at those levels. So again, it's been very popular. From a personal perspective, if we could double that would be great. I'm not quite sure. Like that's the uptick that we've had. I'm not quite sure what the delta is between uptake and affordability on it. But I'm pretty sure that we're currently at an uptake limit as opposed to an affordability.
There's scope there if schools wanted to get involved.
The cycling proficiency scheme is extremely cost effective because we have a really small team within the department that's dedicated to the delivery of it, okay, along with pedestrian child safety training. It's so cost effective because it's delivered by by teachers themselves, as either as part of their lessons or as after schools projects generally. So there is additional capacity there within the system. Should more schools wish to take that up, then the capacity would be there. But it is an extremely small team within the department that delivers it within my team.
That sounds like more of that low-hanging fruit, though, in terms of there is the money there and the logistics there. It's just about getting it rolled out to more schools who want to uptake it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure just if we've got, is it Guinness resource funding?
Yes, okay.
It's a small team that we
Maybe
have.
come back to us on it, Colin, if you can, just to provide some information.
It's offered to all schools, so if every primary school in Northern Ireland wanted to run it, then we would have to see what that would do to the, with regards to resource funding and things like that. But it's a very, very cost-effective programme to run.
Okay, that's all from me. Over to Keith Buchanan.
Thanks, Chair, for the full table. Appreciate that. You threw me there completely. I'm not used to it.
Keith Buchanan guy.
My question is relating to, I'm looking at this capital budget 22-23, roughly 12 million, and then provisional expenditure 23-24 is 10. What's it costing? Obviously that's capital money. What's it costing to spend that 12 million? Or is that included? Is your guys' wages, stroke external people included in that, or is that actual work on the ground?
Everything. That's everything in there. So our staff, the consultancy staff, any consultancy design work or supervision work that we would have done. So that's our entire capital budget.
And how much of that would you be putting out to consultants? So what percentage of the, let's call it the wages cost or the procurement cost, would you be doing yourselves, and much would you be putting externally?
Yeah, I mean the internal design capacity. So if we're talking about design of individual projects, the internal design capacity is quite small. So we would have one or two people within each division who are embedded within our internal consultancy partner teams. So there's 4 divisions. So you're talking somewhere between 6 and 8 people who are funded internal staff. But our design programme, as Colin mentioned earlier, there are over 100 schemes that are in different stages of design. Those 68 people wouldn't have the capacity to design those 100 schemes, so we do rely on our outsourced consultancy partners in that, and Colin alluded to that we are doubling the design capacity for that through that contract, so that's one of the key steps that will allow us to ramp up design capacity over the next.
You're doubling
years.
that contract externally.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen then? Colin, you talked about possibly next year you double your spend. Okay. So is that going to be more money outsourced? Yeah. Is that a good way of spending it?
I think this is a trend. This is not just something that's happened now. This has been something that's been happened over the past 10, 15. Certainly, I think we put the first partner contract in place about 2005. So it was recognised at that point in time that we cannot afford to pay staff internally to that degree and have design units in place to deliver everything that we do. So it's every scheme internally. The partner contract or the partner consultant would be assisting us in delivering. So that could be a resurfacing scheme. It could be an accident improvement. It could be traffic calming, right across the whole range. And that's been happening, as I say, for many, many, many years. I would love to be in a position to say that we can attract the staff internally to increase our structure by 25 or 30% to be able to do the majority of that internally. But you've heard witnesses before giving you the reasons why we can't do that. So we're left in a position where we are actively trying to fill all of the gaps that we have. So we have about 30 people in posts, and with 59 in the structure. We want to fill that as quickly as we possibly can with the right people, but we still will be heavily reliant on the private sector to assist us in that delivery.
You're sort of wearing, Colin, excuse the term, 2 hats. You're wearing the 10% sustainable travel hat and you're wearing A5 hat. How are you going to do that? Because fundamentally, if that budget goes up for sustainable travel and active routes and all that, which is fine, I have no issue with that, but it has to come from somewhere. So you heard me commenting earlier about the grass. We'll not go there again, but I'm using that as an example. So we're going to have excellent cycleways, which is fair enough, and that's great. But then our roads is going to be poorer. So how are we going to balance that? And you're going to have to literally wear two hats.
Yeah, so I think
helmets.
Yeah, I think the reality is what I said earlier. There are difficult decisions ahead of us to be taken. The department, in broad terms, the functions it carries out have about 95% of those functions have a legislative requirement behind them. So it's not going to be just the Climate Change Act that's got a legislative requirement behind it. We have, as I say, with 95% of the functions that we carry out have that as well. So there are difficult decisions to be taken, and difficult decisions for the department and difficult decisions for the executive to prioritise where the needs will be, with the A5 being a flagship scheme and the active travel falling under the Climate Change Act.
And I've one final question, Chair, if I may, Mr. Chairperson, with respect to how do you prioritise? So I'm going to say, for example, schemes. I'm going to use an example, a little village in my area where there's 150 houses and they're walking on the road to get to school. It's probably 30 metres of a footpath required. We've been lobbying a year and a half. So I'm using that as an example, whereas something that's needed and then there's a nice to have. How do you prioritise those in each area? How do you prioritise and score them to say, right, how do you weight them? Because that's they're walking around a blind corner to school and to the shops in an urban village, or well, a village like so.
So there's currently, I'm sure you've heard the lines from the department in the past that we'll carry out an assessment and we'll rank that. We've seen it. So there is a mechanism there for carrying out assessments of schemes. In the past, cycle and active travel schemes would have been competing against accident remedial schemes or traffic calming schemes. And whilst there was a weighting given to try and give a fair hearing for the active travel scheme, if there are a number of people being killed or a large number of serious or of accidents in a certain place versus putting in a footway link, the one to the left is going to score more than the one to the right. What we're doing here is going to put in place, because we've got active travel funding, which is ring-fenced to a degree, we're going to put in place a mechanism which will score active travel schemes against active travel schemes. So you should the theory would be that there should be more chance of an active travel scheme being delivered. So your active travel scheme will compete with the village beside you or the village on the other side of the country.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen. Just a couple of points in terms. I think you'd mentioned earlier about councils, 11 different councils that all have very different, remits and areas and so on. What's your experience in terms of? Is there much variation in terms of their approach to active travel? Do you feel?
I think there, without mentioning any specific councils, there definitely is. There are some just who have been doing it for a much longer time, and have much more ambitious plans than others. What we're trying to do in engaging this last year, we've engaged an awful lot with the councils, or over it's been over a year, and in trying to get the councils to tell us what is your 5-year ambition to hear your 5-year programme for delivering greenways, so that we can go to the councils that are less ambitious and say, look, there's more opportunity here, and encourage them to take forward more feasibility studies or early design work so that they can have a scheme in the pipeline. An important, get off on a slight tangent, but a really important point about greenways. My history has been delivering dual carriageway schemes for a long time, and greenways are a small dual carriageway scheme when it comes to the process side of things. They take a long time to go from inception through to completion. You've got the same processes that you have for a dual carriageway scheme. You've got your early design, your route development, preferred route choice, statutory procedures to follow, public inquiry, planning, environmental impact assessments. You've got all of that to go through with them as well. So trying to get the councils on board now so that we do the work to have a scheme started now, which you could start construction in 4 or 5 years' time. That's the sort of horizon that we're looking at. Some councils haven't really gone too far on that journey. Other councils have a sort of pipeline of schemes that you can identify moving forward.
Yeah, just on that then, on the greenways, particularly the Bangor to Newton Ards section, or maybe better known as the Newton Ards to Bangor section, have you any update on that? So obviously planning permission was granted just under a year ago, and there's a keenness certainly to get that scheme underway, which would link Bangor with Newton Ards, albeit it's a fairly modest length, just over 2k, compared to some other schemes. But is there any update available on that one, please?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to steal the council's thunder, but
yeah.
I understand that they're on the final stages of being ready to appoint a contractor to begin work with that. And from our perspective, we're working very closely with Ards and North Down Borough Council on the financial profiling of that project through to completion. So I would be extremely optimistic. There's an extremely professional team within the council that are delivering that project and the other projects in that council area. And like I say, I don't want to steal their thunder, and we're working really closely with them, but I think it's on the final couple of steps to award of a contract.
Yeah, thanks. And the fund contribution of that?
The department, I think we mentioned earlier, so the department generally funds on greenways up to 50% of the capital cost of approved projects. And that, I think that 50% funding speaks to the additional benefits that comes with greenways with regards to tourism potential and as a civic amenity and things like that, rather than the departmental focus on shorter everyday journeys and modal shift element of our active travel delivery. So there's balances to be struck there as well between where we apportion our overall budgets.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, Chair.
Peter, just arising out of that, given Sustrans' expertise and knowledge in this field, do you think it would be worthwhile to have them as a statutory or required consultee to the subject in terms of where abandonment orders are in place to seek views on where viable greenway network options could be developed?
I think the list of statutory consultees are a matter for councils to determine, are they? However,
outside of the statutory responsibility, then, would it be, do you think, advisable potentially given that?
Absolutely. I think Sustrans bring a lot of expertise to bear, and I think they have brought their expertise to a number of greenway projects over years.
I think that's coming back to one of the points I was making earlier on. We want to see Sustrans partnering with every consultant that we have as a lead consultant taking these forward. The difficulty is that the consultants that we need to deliver these forward are multidisciplinary consultants. So it's both, it's engineering, ground, geotechnical engineers, structures engineers, and the last one's gone out of my head. No, the environmental aspects of it, and we see absolutely about the benefit that Sustrans have brought and will continue to bring, and hopefully through partnerships like that and partnerships with the council as well, that they can be at the given their advice on any of those projects.
Moving on to Danny.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And before I get overly parochial about West Belfast or even the Callan, it's just following on from what Stephen said. He was talking about the councils. I suppose just then looking at envy of the South expenditure, I suppose, was the constraints we have with budgets. But that greenways on the border counties, is there elaborating a wee bit of that?
Yeah, so I can give you a bit of a high level position as to where we are, and Peter can maybe go into some of the specific projects. So we do have quite a number of projects that we're taking, that councils in the north and south are taking forward in partnership, and that we're co-funding. We would sit on the North-South Ministerial Council Senior Officials Group, and Greenways is one of the agenda items on that. And the Minister has agreed very recently, to a study to be carried out between the north and south about how we deliver cross-border greenways, how we have delivered them and how we could better deliver them moving forward. So there's a lot of good work going on there, and again, it's another strand to what we're doing. If you want any details on specific projects, Peter,
yeah, I was just writing down the last one that I keep forgetting the name of it. There are 4 existing cross-border greenways that partnering between border county councils over the years, so that has received funding through Interreg, and the department contributed towards that. So the Northwest Greenway Network would be a major one, and a lot of work has been carried out over there, and the department has funded something to the region of £3.5 million towards the delivery of that Greenway network. There's also the Carlingford Greenway, which is part of a cross-border Greenway network, and future linkages between Narrowwater Bridge, Carlingford, Warren Point and Newry are massive future opportunities that we're going to be looking at as well. And then there is also the Ulster Canal Greenway, which is a massive project, and it's, as Colin mentioned earlier, some of these greenway projects are extremely long term and how they get brought forward, and that's one of them. And then another one would be Enniskillen to Sligo, which is an extremely exciting project with Fermanagh and Omagh working with their colleagues on the other side of the border on the development of those proposals too. So there are those 4 major current greenway projects, and then, as Colin mentioned too, I'm looking forward to over the next year working with our colleagues in the south, who we work with closely anyway, on this feasibility study for extensions to those cross-border greenway networks.
Thank you. And then I'm going to get the last point. I'm going to get very parochial now, because this is the wee update on the Belfast cycling network, and I suppose where we are within West Belfast, because me and Peter have a wee bit of history. We worked together around the Glader route when it first came in, and not without its challenges at the time, Peter, as well, changing behaviours and all of that. And I remember sitting with you in a couple of heated meetings. So I suppose just any challenges that we could be facing in, I suppose, West Belfast, we're now competing with the Glader for safe cycle route. I made the point earlier on, a lot of my journeys are very small, but I couldn't even let my 13-year-old daughter go and cycle down to the leisure centre from my house, because she competes with a Glader on the route. So it's a wee bit about that, where we're at, and the future proofing of our community, empowering them.
Yeah, well, I suppose with regards to the Belfast Cycling Network in general, Colin touched on it earlier, that we are progressing the short-term schemes in BCN, and it was published in 2022. This is now 2024. That kind of alludes to the fact that it takes a couple of years to develop schemes, and we're working on the majority of those schemes through design. A number of them are coming to the fore now for construction this year, and West Belfast Greenway Phase 1 would be one of those schemes, and we had very positively received public engagement event on that just on the 21st of May. We've had over 100 responses to our proposals for that, and overwhelmingly positive. Similarly, last month we held a public engagement event for outline proposals for Ravenhill Road, which is another of the short-term schemes, and again extremely positively received, and I think we've over 160 responses to that. And that feedback from the community that we get, particularly in the early stages of design, really helps to inform our designs going forward. Lagmore, to get extremely parochial with you, Danny, I'm very hopeful that the traffic regulation order for the cycle routes in Lagmore will be published later this month, and hopefully if we can get through the statutory process of that in a timely fashion. It's obviously subject to those, but I would hope that we would be in construction on Lagmore Avenue cycle routes Phase 1 this financial year as well. The thing to say about that, Danny, completely what you're saying, this is about, some of these schemes are about shorter everyday journeys. They're only going to be one piece of a jigsaw that becomes a connected network, but each piece of that jigsaw can bring local benefits for everyday people. So for example, on Lagmore, for people who are, you know, in some of those housing areas down there, to connect down to the Stewartstown Road, to the local school, that then begins the connection to Brook Activity Centre and thing, and then on to onto the Colin Connect and the Glider route. So this is, we spoke about the linkages between TransLink and active travel. So at the Colin Connect transport hub for the glider, at the time that we developed that, we put in secure cycle parking as part of the project, and that has the opportunity to connect 10 or 20,000 people to the glider route through their first mile journeys, secure parking at the transport hub, and then onward via public transport into Belfast. You know, so these opportunities are there.
Thank you. And Colin leading the way, brilliant.
Thanks, Danny. Andrew?
Which Colin?
Thanks for that.
What are yourself, Andrew?
Thank you. And again, happy Bike Week. I'm gonna try and, not word for word, but I think it's important to actually tease out some of the same points that I did with Sustrans with yourselves. Okay. And before I go any further, again, I want to associate myself with Mr. Durkin and Mr. Buchanan. Mr. Durkin, it's very important to wear helmets. Definitely. Always wear helmets. Skid lid, brain bucket, very important. Mr. Buchanan did raise a very good point about footpaths in rural areas, and I think that is really important because quite literally, well, maybe not exactly the same drum, but a very similar one. You know, rural settlements, children are having to walk, you know, maybe more than 100 metres on very exposed roads. You have landowners that want, not even sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, you know, the lane where that's the one, they want to give the land nearly to do it, but you know, is it actually, but it's very difficult. Is an active travel way avenue a better way for these communities to go about this? Because again, it's such an important issue. So that's number one question. You know, you talk about the low-hanging fruit, and again, you know, we see that, but again, you know, it's how do we build it up into the bigger network, really, you know? And again, that's very important. Again, Holland's very important. I'm just curious, it's also quite it's a very densely populated country. Were there learnings there for the rural areas? And again, I know that, you know, not that I've ever been to Holland, but I do know that Holland, Belgium, these places, cycling just is a way of life. I mean, if anybody who follows cycling understands that. So that's something to tease out as well. And again, it's just to come back again, that only 1% of people cycle because of the perception of the risk. And that really is something that is the thing that has to change. How do we do it? And again, it comes with, you know, it comes with the quiet lanes. Again, we talk about this, but jeepers, I have never seen it being implemented. And again, there's, you know, towns and villages in my constituency that want these solutions, and they say, happy days, there's a solution, but jeepers, we never get the solution. So again, I suppose those are the points, again, that they're similar to what was made to Sustrans, but I've sort of rounded them all up into one big bundle there for you. And that's about the height of it, really. Thank you.
Okay, so quite a few points there. I think that in itself sort of illustrates the challenge that we have ahead and the task that we have ahead. So Holland, as I said, started off in the 60s doing what they're doing, and it's now as a culture. There was one school that it was the Dutch cycling embassy who hosted us, and they took us to a few different places, but they took us to a secondary school. We just happened to be passing it at the time that the school was finishing, and not a single car, every child on a bike. And it was actually quite dangerous because the number of bikes were coming at you. a different type of danger. But look, we do only have a certain amount of resource to deliver, and we have to prioritise things to some degree. Quiet roads, rural roads, is something that we do have on the radar. But we haven't got to yet. But in our view, the greenways are probably a safer option if we can get greenways linking those key areas, rather than trust that a car will go slow just because there's a sign on the road to say that it should go slow. So if we can separate...
I don't mean to interject, I really don't, but my understanding of the quiet lanes was actual physical infrastructure, not to stop the traffic, but to slow it down. And again, that is where the perception of danger comes from, is because people are flying past people 40, 50, 60 mile an hour. And that's I mean, and again, I have a different perception of risk, but jeepers, it scares me too.
So look, that it is fair enough, but we have to segregate. The ideal scenario is that we segregate the cyclists from the motorists. If we're talking about a rural road where we put in place, like Holland or the Netherlands had, for example, certain roads where half of it was painted red, and it was quite narrow. In fact, there was a red strip on one side and a red strip on the other side, and very little for the cars in the middle. That works over there because their culture and mindset is different to what it is here. So again, it comes back to this behavioural change, and we need to prioritise what we do. We need to take it step by step. We just can't move from. It's going to take decades to get to where we really want it to be. We can put individual linkages into the network, as Peter said earlier on. Those individual linkages will be useful for some, but it's not until we have all the connectivity there and it actually is a proper connected network that we actually will have what we all want to have. So it's a long journey with a lot of things to be done on it. But I think we all have the same vision as to where we want to be.
Enough.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. I'm sure if you have any more issues, you can write to the department. Over to yourself, Peter, then Mark, and that will do us.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming in today. I've got a couple of questions, so I'll try to maybe tie them together and ask them individually. So, at the start of your presentation, you mentioned about the traffic teams and the active travel teams, and you mentioned about the active travel teams. We've got about 20 at the minute. We're moving to 30, or maybe we're on 30 now. But certainly aiming for 59. How many are in the traffic teams?
I don't have that figure available today, but we could certainly get you those.
Would it be
those
significantly
figures.
more, just out of curiosity?
Well, the traffic teams within the divisions are generally part of a network development team, so that would be a combined team that looks after traffic measures and larger local transport safety measure schemes and things like that. So they're a bigger overall team. I'm not sure within network development teams. Eastern Division, Peter, you might know, or with your experience of working with Eastern Division, would be the only division that has a separate traffic and network development team. In the other three divisions, it's a combined team. Okay. So it is a much bigger cohort of people, but they have a much bigger remit or things to do.
Yeah, no, that's grand. And secondly, you mentioned, Colin, that we're at the start of our journey in terms of active travel, but obviously active travel has been something that's been looked at over the last 10 years. What would your assessment be of that 10-year period? Hopefully we're into happier times and moving forward together on bicycles together, but I mean, what would your assessment be of that 10-year period?
I'm reluctant to sort of look back. Like I came into this post in November, or took on the active travel role in November 2022, and clearly have set out hopefully what the ambitions are and the things that we've put in place to ensure that we have good high quality infrastructure put in place moving into the future. Would it be better that we were having this discussion 10 years ago and putting these plans in place back then? Absolutely. But the teams of people who so the active travel was an add-on to the traffic teams for that period that you're talking about. There are lots of good examples of schemes that they have delivered of missing linkages in rural areas. I know of in the division that I was involved in, and lots of great schemes that have been delivered. But I think we're moving into a completely different era. There are hopefully more people of influence on the same page as we are, and Yeah, it's as I say, the vision moving forward is completely different to what we had 10, 15 years ago. I think that's probably the point. We had visions 10 or 15 years ago. Now we've got plans, delivery plans, which are going to get things done on the ground.
And to touch on Keith's point, 2022-23 with £12 million, 23-24 £10 million, with potentially double the budget, potentially, right, not putting figures on it, and the fact that that's everything contained within that amount of money. Sustrans, we're talking about there's no core funding for them. Is that something that could be explored within any increased money that comes through? So if we do have more money, is core funding for groups like Sustrans delivering active travel through behavioural change, is that something that could be contained within that future figure?
So that's the capital figure, and the resource figure is at best staying equivalent to what last year was, and that's where the behavioural change stuff comes out of. So again, I'm not quite sure I agree with the term core funding. I think there are in all of the different jurisdictions there are competitions to deliver certain services which could be wider than what the programmes are here. But certainly the way I see moving forward for the involvement of Sustrans, one, we'll have governance boards which Sustrans will be invited to sit on, but partnering with all of our consultants who are going to be key to the delivery of individual both programmes and projects moving forward.
So despite that increased figure, we're going to potentially see no change to no additions to groups like Sustrans in terms of the behavioural role that they play.
So on the behavioural side for the incoming year, I'd alluded to that whilst it's subject to EQAA, which went live yesterday, the money should be there to permit the active schools travel programme to continue this financial year, to the end of this financial year. We're putting in place measures with CPD to ensure that the contractual documentation and so on, or the procurement documentation and so on, is in place to allow that to happen. I think we, as part of the work that we're doing to bring to the Minister about the 10%, behavioural change is a really important part of that there, and it will be part of future decisions as to just how much money we'll have on resource and capital. We have over the past number of years, it's been largely capital with a very, very small pot of resource in the active travel front.
This is something that's been kicking around in my head because the Netherlands has been mentioned today quite a lot, and about the cultural change that took place over there. I don't know if any of you guys are on Twitter, but there's a Canadian planner called Brett Tadarian, and he always shows a photograph of Holland in the 70s compared to streets now. In the 70s, it's just carnage with cars. So infrastructure and behavioural change play that really crucial role together to change mindsets. Second last question, has the department looked into return on investment on implementing active travel measures? I say that as an East Belfast MLA who's seen C.S. Lewis Square, Cumber Conserve Greenway, the role that active travel has played in bringing people together and delivering money to the local area. Have you guys conducted an assessment on that?
No, I'm aware that the benefit cost ratio to active travel schemes is generally very high, but we wouldn't carry them out on a project by project basis, just in terms of the resources that we have. Now we are looking at, as one of the things that we're going to be looking at going forward, is our monitoring and evaluation of our investment, because obviously I'm sure the committee would want, if we're going to increase investment in active travel, that we increase our assessment of the value of that work and that the money was well spent, that we aren't in that Brewster's Millions situation. So it's one of the key posts that we will be looking to fill into the future, but at the minute I'm relatively content that with the level of investment and the level of delivery that we have in the early years of this ramping up period, that my focus is on the actual ramping up of delivery and the ramping up of high quality active travel infrastructure that benefits everybody who's using the street. Because there's a tendency sometimes with active travel that you fall into the trap of thinking it's all about cycling. It is about making our streets more welcoming, accessible, safer for everybody who uses them, from children to the oldest in society, from people with mobility issues, people the visually impaired, people who want to cycle, and people who want to push a pram or are pushing a pram about. That's what active travel is really about.
So I see a lot of that on the Cumber Greenway. I mean, I walk and run, cycle there, and I see older people using it, children as well. So it's really important for that. And then lastly, just based on the Cumber Greenway, has there been an assessment of introducing that, things that went well, things that didn't go as well, to maybe, if we do have more money and therefore more greenways flow from that we can introduce them faster, and as something like maybe vesting land from local councils, would that be something that would ever be explored? I'm not proposing that, but is it something that would ever be explored?
Cover the
I'll cover the Cumber Greenway first of all, I suppose, and then you can speak to the thing. I mean, I agree, Peter, the Cumber Greenway's been extremely successful. I actually designed a small section of it as a young engineer. And I'm glad to see it. And what we've done in the last 2 years on the Cumber Greenway, there's been widening of the Greenway along various sections of it, and there's also, we've put in lighting on the urban section of the Cumber Greenway, and what we've put in is as a pilot scheme, environmentally friendly red spectrum lighting, and we'll be carrying out assessments of the success of that with regards to, the point of it is that it shouldn't have a detrimental impact on wildlife within the area, because the Greenway is obviously a traffic-free area. So we'll be carrying out an assessment from the success of the scheme from that respect, but also in the respect of, does it make the Greenway more attractive for users during the winter months at night? And we're just we gathered over the first winter the increase in numbers of users during the hours of darkness, and very early but very encouraging is what I would say about just Cumber Greenway. Does that answer your point, Peter, or are you speaking more widely?
Yeah, I suppose it does in a lot of respects. I mean, one thing that would maybe make the Cumber Greenway less attractive is the lack of gridding. I mean, I've been banging on about that since council as well.
Okay, Peter, I'll deal with that one as well, and I dealt with this one.
You triggered that thought in my head.
Well, it triggers me sometimes as well, but I was speaking to colleagues in councils about that, and I think we talked about the Cumber Greenway being the poor relation to the Connswater Greenway, for example, and the councillors were pressing me on gridding of the Cumber Greenway. So I asked them how much of the Connswater Greenway do they grit, and they don't.
What is gridded, I think?
The C.S. Lewis Square, I think, is gridded. Connswater Greenway is not gridded, according to the councillors that were at the meeting at the time. What I would say about gridding is, and the department's winter service, is that I think we grit 20% of the road network in its entirety, so that's the busiest 20%. Now, I'm definitely going off topic slightly here, but if I was to prioritise areas that I would grit on the active travel network, I would be gritting town centres where the highest footfall is and where the highest potential for people slipping and tripping is, rather than, I've also seen examples of greenways in Mid-Ulster area where the council have put up informatory information with regards to the temperatures and things like that. So very, very cheap, cost-effective ways where where the council or the department doesn't have the resources to carry out a winter service on it to inform people of, when to use the Greenway or when to not. But
and just absolutely last question.
Sorry, Peter, that's about 7. And I'm really confident about.
That's not that many, by the way.
I don't like to pull rank here, but we've got so much more to get through, and the guys have been very understanding. Maybe you can engage in this directly.
I'll give you a shot.
Mark, over to yourself as the last contributor here.
So 7 to beat.
Yeah, I think it might have been 8.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the gents for the presentation and their work on this. In terms of the 10% and the paper that's going up to the Minister, obviously he won't be able to divulge all of the detail of that, but imagine that it's an issue that's caused some confusion and some consternation within the department. I'm sure people will want to hold what they have, particularly when they don't have that much to begin with. Would it be possible to tell us some of the possible permutations of that, or the interpretations of what that 10% might look like, and what's the disparity between them? I mean, what's a best case 10%? But I mean, when we're talking best case, that might mean the most money possible for active travel, and what's the worst case in terms of the lowest amount of money? What's the difference between those possible 10%, in other words?
That's another way of asking me what the 10% figure is.
No, let's try. 5 or how many different equations there are? How many different equations that there are?
Understand. So, look, it's certainly much more than what we currently have and what we currently spend. One thing I should say is that we do and have historically spent a lot of money on active travel. Anyway, although we wouldn't have been coming and singing as this is the amount we're spending on active travel, we do carry out, we do build footways and cycleways. We do maintain footways. We spend a significant amount of money on capital resurfacing on footways annually. There's street lighting that we have, which contributes a large part of this contribution is towards providing safety for pedestrians. So there are things that we currently already invest, which are not in that sort of 10-12 million pound figure. So we're not really reporting that total investment at that point. So that's the type of work that we're looking at to see, right, what's new investment, what's existing investment, and where does that take us to? All I can say is that the 10% in most of our scenarios is multipliers more than what we're currently spending on at this point in time.
I think that piece of work sort of touches on the point that Mr. Buchanan and Andrew had raised, and you'd spoken of historical competition almost between proposed active travel schemes and proposed and necessary or deemed desired safety improvements. And it's about, I think, complementarity rather than competition. It's where you can see this work needs done. A footpath there would increase the number of children walking to that school, therefore there's an active travel benefit, and there's undoubtedly a safety benefit as well. But I do imagine that there will be issues within the department from other areas as well, because of course transport includes public transport as well. And on that, as regards active travel, and you spoke of the work and the safe bike or secure bike parking at transport hubs. If one leg of a journey is via active travel, so someone walks or cycles to a bus station or bus stop, is the whole journey deemed active travel?
So again, go back to the definition, and again, the Act doesn't define what active travel is. What we are thinking currently is that
active walking, wheeling, and cycling.
But it's physical activity, so it's being physically active by doing any of those. And whilst public transport has got an absolutely massive role in pushing carbon targets down in the future and complying with the Climate Change Act from that perspective, moving many more people longer distances. When you're sitting on a bus or a train, it's hard to argue that is you're being physically active at that point in time. So at this point in time, we're not putting that into the equation of being active travel, part of an active travel. As part of a journey, where part of that journey is active travel, but that element of it is not being defined as active travel at this point in time.
Yeah, it's really about active and sustainable travel is the point, and how those two things go hand in hand and will go hand in hand in the future to allow us to meet our Climate Change Act ambitions.
Okay, and members and yourselves had touched on this, the value of the cycling proficiency scheme. How valued is it by the department? What sort of level of funding is allocated to that? How has that gone over the years? I remember last year was it that the funding was cut and then some of it was restored. Was all of it restored? Because I've seen the reports and you've alluded to them today about the effectiveness of it. But
so you're right. Last year there was a cut. I think it was completely cut, that programme. This year, my understanding is that we're at the same levels we were the previous to that cut, and fairly confident with the uptake that we currently have that we can deliver on the numbers that we've talked about earlier. We do need to go away and look at in the future, how do we take that 40% up to 50, 60, 70%, and what that might mean with regard to budget that we talked about earlier.
Because it is budget rather than resource. You said the teachers delivered, but this is, I'd missed last week's meeting, sorry Chair, and I know the PSNI were in it with a specific focus and locus on road safety. But when we're looking at record, I suppose sums of money being generated through record numbers of speeding fines being issued, and now finally a sort of move from the Road Safety Partnership to contribute towards road safety advertising, all that the department haven't been able to fund of late. That money should also, I think, be filtering its way into education programmes and the likes of the cycling proficiency scheme. I'm sure you'd concur. And then just finally, you'd referred to 3 pilots in terms of the Safe Route to Schools thing. Could you let us know where they are?
Where they are. I was afraid somebody was going to ask us, because one of them changed. One of them's in and around Ballymena. I think it's Camp Hill Primary School. One that I'm looking at is St Ida's Primary School on the outskirts of South Belfast, and the third one escapes me, but it was a relatively rural location. No. The first, originally we were looking at that, and then we changed. So I'm sorry, I'll come back to you with the 3 exact locations, but they were 2 relatively. No, okay. But I mean, in terms of the thing, in terms of what the Safer Routes to Schools is talking about, so we spoke earlier about the active travel delivery plan and the development of the network plans in the larger towns, and then once you develop a network plan, the prioritisation of the delivery of that network plan, and 2 of the areas that we'll be prioritising within that would be to try to create those safe routes to schools. So wherever the local schools are within the town, we would hope that those would come through as some of the earlier routes to be delivered, because we see that as having a good potential for modal shift. That would get you from the 50% of primary school kids that live within 1 mile of their school, or the 50% of secondary school kids who live within 3 miles of school. If we can make those cyclable journeys attractive and safe, that parents will allow their children to make them, or they'll make them with them. That's the aim of the Safer Routes to Schools. And then you're talking about in the immediate vicinity of the school, what can you do? Claire and Beth mentioned the park and stride and things like that. So for that treatment of the immediate vicinity of the school is also what we're looking at within these pilots of what can you do to encourage and enable more people to feel confident and safe to walk and cycle that last leg of the journey, as it were.
Okay, and there's a tie-in then from others in the department, the likes of your street lighting people, footpath people, traffic calming people, and so forth.
It's actually a good point. Like everything that we do to deliver, should it be a greenway or just any active travel scheme, will require additional people and resource throughout the department, in our lands teams, in our headquarters teams to do vesting. Every aspect, or traffic people to input, or street lighting people. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's cross-cutting across the whole piece, albeit the one directorate is responsible for the actual policy and delivery of active travel.
But we're also, to give you some confidence, we're doing a lot of work with our colleagues in those other teams internally to look for those complementary benefits. So where there is going to be a perhaps we're going to put in additional cycling infrastructure or something like that. If the maintenance team at the same time were looking to resurface that road, there are synergies there in carrying out the things at the same time, and similarly the street lighting teams might be wanting to upgrade the street lighting on the street at that same time. So it's trying to tease out all those complementary benefits. Even wider than that, we're dealing with colleagues in our Living with Water on certain projects to see if they're going to be implementing a SUDS scheme or something like that. If we were going to put a cycle lane along that same route, we would obviously want to work in partnership with them and interdepartmentally then, and working with colleagues in Department for Communities with their environmental improvement hat on, because active travel and making the pedestrian environment more attractive can be an enabler for that regeneration thing that Department for Communities are doing. So we're trying to tease out all of those additional synergies and benefits that we can do, so that the sum of what we deliver as a whole is greater than its parts.
Thank you. And no more questions here, but just to make the point, I suppose, given the human resource challenges all that poses, not just for the one department, it does, I think, add more weight to the argument or suggestion of some sort of outsourcing of some of the work on the other end of the things in terms of education and implementing behavioural or encouraging behavioural change. And I would just like to be associated with comments others had made around, core funding at some point for Sustrans or someone. I know there has to be a competitive process around any such thing to drive that forward.
Thanks, Mark. Gents, that concludes the session. You'll be glad to know that you've given us a lot of time today. I think there was 2 excellent sessions, over 25 questions in this one and the previous one, so nearly 50 combined. I think that's just testament to how high a priority this committee finds this topic, and we probably could have gone on forever, but we have to get out of here at some stage. So there are a number of issues we'd appreciate you following up on. Firstly is the outcome of the work to define what the transport budget includes. I think that would be key to certainly teasing out some of these key aspects we talked about, particularly the 10%. And I think I asked a couple of questions too regarding per capita for funding per head and things, so if you come back to us on those points as well. I know other members will probably continue to be in touch with you by email and by letter to follow up on some of their local issues as well. So thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it, and we'll see you again soon. Probably see you next week, Colin, actually. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
All right.
We'll send the list of things down.
Yeah.
So that we know as well.
Thanks, Sustrans, as well. See you all later. Take care. Appreciate it. Folks, does anyone need a 5-minute comfort break? Because I'm conscious we've been 2 hours 43. Are we okay to crack on?
Crack on.
That's good.
You just want to say the back? Are you happy enough? We should be 20 minutes or so. Good to hear.
Never's watching. Never's watching.
Yeah, we shouldn't be too much longer.
I thought
that was a really good session, though. I really did. And there's a number of issues to tease out again. I didn't want to stifle debate, but I was just conscious of how long we were already an hour over schedule.
You didn't want to cycle debate?
Cycle debate, especially on a bike week.
We could cycle and have this someday, that'd be good.
We could do.
You're up for it, Keith, yeah?
It's a wee bit far for me. I'd probably be about Dungannon now.
Park and stride. Okay, folks, well, we'll move on then to item 9, which is an SL1, the U8133 unnamed road off Ferrari Road, Newton Hamilton, abandonment order, Northern Ireland 2024. Just rings off the tongue. It's at page 115, the SL1 proposal for a statutory rule. Members will be aware this rule is subject to a negative resolution, so just to inform you that the rule will abandon an area of 5,020 square metres of the U8133 unnamed road of Ferrari Road, Newton Hamilton, commencing at its junction with the U8132 unnamed road and extending for a distance of 703 metres in a north-easterly direction after the completion of such works as the department considers necessary to provide alternative facilities. The abandonment has been requested to restrict public access close to the boundary with a local quarry and improve health and safety at the quarry site. One objection was received, and the department has, as per the committee's previous request, helpfully provided detail on the nature of the objection and its response to each point raised. The department advises that it is satisfied the appropriate processes have been followed and that the issues raised by the objector have been fully addressed. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Content?
Yep.
Item 10 is SL1, the footway between Peters Hill and Clifton Street, Belfast, Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2024. At page 122, the SL1 proposal for a statutory rule. The rule is subject to negative resolution, and to inform members that the rule will abandon 2 areas of the western side of the West Link, Belfast, comprising 726.805 square metres of footway extending north for 207 metres from Peters Hill and 79.053 square metres of footway extending for 30 metres from Regent Street to Clifton Street. The abandonment has been requested by Department of Communities and Belfast City Council to facilitate the environmental improvement scheme, which will include a new pathway and general landscaping of the area. No objections have been received. Are members content for the statutory rule? Yes, excellent. Item 11, SL1, the Lurgan Road Portadown Stopping Up Order Northern Ireland 2024. At page 127, SL1 proposal for a statutory rule. The rule is subject to a negative resolution. The rule will stop up Lurgan Road Portadown at 2 locations. The road will be stopped up by the installation of bollards or pedestrian barriers at all entry points, including 1 lockable removable bollard to facilitate access for statutory bodies as and when required. The proposal will be required by a property consultant's the proposal has been requested by a property consultant on behalf of the developer to comply with conditions of approved planning application for a redevelopment in the area. The stopped-up road, which is 439 metres long in length, will be reconfigured into a cycle lane footpath with wide verges on either side. No objections were received on the proposal. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Excellent. Item 12, SL1, the Kings Lane Warm Point Stopping Up Order Northern Ireland 2024. Page 131, SL1 proposal for a statutory rule. And at page 135 is correspondence from the Minister of Infrastructure. The rule is subject to negative resolution. I just want to remind members that the committee received oral evidence on this proposal for this statutory rule at its meeting on the 22nd of May. This was requested by the committee as the SL1 did provide any information on the nature of the objections to the proposal or the department's response to those objections. The committee requested further information following the oral evidence session, and the Minister's response is provided at page 135. The Minister indicates that the stopping up order is part of a planning condition for pedestrian safety, and a number of alternative options were proposed by the department as a statutory consultee. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Excellent. Item 13 is the subordinate legislation. SR is not subject to assembly procedure. The following statutory rule are not subject to assembly procedures and are not required to be led. For transparency, the Committee for Infrastructure follows establishment of convention on these assemblies so that the Assembly and Committee can consider them. I want to advise members that the statutory rule is not subject to assembly proceedings, and it is located and detailed at page 138 of the meeting pack. The rule is not subject to any assembly procedure and is not required to be led. Are members content to note the statutory rule? Yep. Excellent. Item 14 is the subordinate legislation SL1 not subject to assembly procedure, and I want to advise members that there is one proposal SL1 for a statutory rule that is not subject to assembly proceedings, which can be found at page 145 of members' packs. The rule is not subject to assembly procedure and is not required to be led. Are members content, or do they have any issues they wish to raise? Are they content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Okay. Excellent. Moving on, members, can I seek agreement to take item 18 next, which is the June monitoring round, which is in table packs. So the in-year monitoring round 2024, page 3 of the table pack is the Department for Infrastructure June monitoring submission to the Department of Finance. And I just want to inform members that the department has provided a paper detailing £45.5 million worth of resource bids and £170.4 million of capital bids submitted in the June monitoring round. No reduced requirements were identified by the departments, and I just want to take views then from members on schedule and an oral evidence session with the departmental officials on the June monitoring round before the summer recess. Clerk, what are your thoughts on this in terms of our time schedule and availability of officials?
Chair would need to check the availability of officials, but it has been in the work programme for a few weeks now as TBC for, but we would aim to get them either next week or the following week.
Okay. Are we content with that next week or the following week, whatever we can be squeezed in as quickly as possible, basically, members? Yep, happy with that. Excellent. Okay, moving on is the draft forward work programme, and just to advise you members that the committee will receive oral evidence on the A5 meeting next week. Members will be aware that there are some sensitivities around the A5, and in order to best able to discuss this fully, it may be necessary that some of that evidence will be in closed session. So members content with that? Yep. And are we content for the forward work programme to be updated to reflect any decisions of about today's evidence session? Excellent. And just to seek finally agreement with the evidence sessions set out in the forward work plan. Excellent. Item 17 is any other business. I have no other business. Does any other member have any other business? Nope. And the date and time of the next meeting is 10 a.m. next Wednesday here in room 29. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you
for your time today. I appreciate it.
Committee room 29. Sound. 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 Committee room 29. Sound.